For much of the ancient world, the land we now call China existed almost like a myth. Distant, powerful, and wrapped in mystery. Caravans that ventured along the Silk Road returned with silks, spices, and whispered stories of a civilization of immense wealth, discipline, and ingenuity. While many great empires elsewhere would rise and collapse in spectacular fashion, China endured. Dynasty after dynasty, emperor after emperor, it rebuilt, reinvented, and pushed forward, leaving some of the most extraordinary marks on human history, from constructing the longest man-made structure on Earth to witnessing the largest and deadliest wars humanity has ever known. China stands as the world's oldest continuous civilization, stretching back more than 5,000 years. It has survived the ancient era, navigated the medieval age, and transformed itself in the modern world. But will its rise continue? To uncover the truth behind this remarkable civilization, we must peel back the layers of history. China's earliest human settlements took root along two great lifelines, the Yellow River in the north and the Yangtze River in the south. Here, on fertile floodplains, Neolithic communities adopted agriculture, cultivating millet in the north and rice in the humid, lush south. The land offered abundance, yet it also carried grave danger. The Yellow River, unpredictable and violent, routinely burst its banks, sweeping away villages, fields, and entire families. For the people of these early settlements, the river was both a giver of life and a bringer of destruction. Their future depended on taming its waters. It was during this formative age that the legendary, and likely partly mythological, figure Yu emerged. Known later as Yu the Great, he was tasked with solving the catastrophe that had undone countless early communities. Yu understood the scale of the challenge. His own father, Gun, had spent years attempting to control the floods through dikes and dams, only for each structure to be shattered by the river's unstoppable force. Where Gun failed, Yu chose a different path. Instead of blocking the floods, he sought to guide them. According to tradition, Yu traveled across the land for over a decade, studying the terrain and rallying local clans. He consulted with the semi-mythical agricultural innovator Hu Yi, a culture hero credited in some legends with advancing early farming techniques. Together, they proposed an ingenious system of dredged channels and canals that redirected floodwaters toward the sea, while preserving enough water to irrigate fields. The plan worked. The devastating floods subsided, the farmland stabilized, and the people prospered. Yu's achievement left such a profound mark on early China that he was elevated to rulership, becoming the founding figure of the semi-legendary Xia Dynasty, said to be China's first. With Yu's legendary achievements came the rise of the Xia Dynasty, the foundation of China's long dynastic tradition. Under Yu's leadership, the early Xia lands prospered. Their society remained primarily agricultural, yet this era is credited with several early technological and cultural milestones: improved stone tools for farming, early bronze experimentation, and the refinement of a lunar-based calendar system that shaped Chinese timekeeping for millennia. As stability grew, Yu divided his realm into 9 administrative regions. Each was governed by a local lord, but all owed loyalty to the central authority, a prototype of the feudal hierarchy that would define China for ages to come. After decades spent taming rivers and battling hostile tribes, Yu the Great eventually grew old. The question that haunted the state was simple: who would rule next? Yu did not intend for his son, Qi, to inherit the throne. Instead, he designated his trusted Minister of Justice, Gao Yao, as his successor. But Gao Yao died prematurely, and a respected tribal leader named Yi was chosen to govern in Yu's place. The lords, however, rejected this decision. Yu had ruled for nearly half a century, and their loyalty to him was so profound that they demanded Qi succeed his father. Their insistence prevailed, and Qi became ruler not through personal merit, but through hereditary right, marking the true beginning of dynastic succession in China. This system would dominate Chinese governance for thousands of years. By the 16th century BCE, the Xia Dynasty reached its tragic end. Its final ruler, Ji, a distant descendant of Yu, was remembered in ancient sources as tyrannical and self-indulgent. Chronicles portray him as a ruler driven by cruelty, consumed by excess, waging wars for revenge or pleasure, and ignoring the suffering of his people. His behavior violated one of early China's most important philosophical principles, the mandate of heaven, the belief that heaven grants authority to virtuous rulers, but withdraws its favor from the corrupt and unjust. In the eyes of the people, heaven had abandoned Jai. China was now entering the Bronze Age, and a powerful new force rose against the decaying Xia state. Armed with superior bronze weaponry and supported by discontented lords, this rising clan overthrew Ji. Thus ended the Xia, and in their place emerged the dynasty that would reshape early Chinese civilization, the Shang. The Shang Dynasty emerged victorious over the failing Xia regime, and unlike their predecessors, they left behind something invaluable, a written record. Their inscriptions, etched onto animal bones and turtle shells, form the earliest significant body of Chinese writing. These oracle bones contain more than 3,000 characters, many of which evolved directly into modern Chinese script. Despite the Shang ruling over 3,600 years ago, these discoveries allow us to understand their society with remarkable clarity. The Shang were an active, expansionist people. Their armies and traders traveled widely, returning with goods such as seashells, which became a form of currency. Their society followed an early feudal-like structure that enriched the nobility while placing heavy burdens on farmers and laborers, who lived with little autonomy. With a powerful military and centralized authority, resistance from below was nearly impossible. Religion shaped nearly every aspect of Shang rule. High priests held immense influence, conducting rituals meant to maintain harmony between the earthly and spiritual realms. Royal burials were elaborate, and some included human sacrifices, performed to secure divine favor or ensure attendants accompanied their rulers into the afterlife. These practices, though stark by modern standards, reflected deeply rooted beliefs about duty, loyalty, and the cosmic order. Militarily, the Shang were formidable. Their mastery of bronze-making, especially weapons, armor, and chariot fittings, allowed them to dominate neighboring tribes. Yet the dynasty was far from stable. Conflicts, rivalries, and external pressure forced them to relocate their capital several times over their 6 centuries of rule. The dynasty's decline centered around its final ruler, Di Xin, also known as King Zhou of Shang. Ancient records portray him as a ruler who lost discipline and alienated his court through extravagance and harsh punishments. His behavior was seen as a violation of moral order, and many in the kingdom believed he had lost the mandate of heaven, the divine approval required to rule. In 1046 BCE, the Zhou clan, vassals from the Wei Valley, rebelled. At the Battle of Muye, many conscripted laborers and enslaved soldiers refused to fight for the Shang and defected to the Zhou side. The remaining Shang forces were overwhelmed, and the dynasty collapsed. According to historical accounts, Di Xin retreated to his palace and took his own life rather than face capture. With this decisive victory, the Zhou proclaimed that heaven had transferred its mandate to them, establishing a doctrine that would guide Chinese political thought for the next 3 millennia. The Zhou Dynasty was the longest-lasting dynasty in Chinese history, enduring for nearly 8 centuries. During this vast expanse of time, China experienced some of the most transformative developments of the ancient world. Innovation flourished. Large-scale irrigation reshaped agriculture. Extensive canal networks expanded trade. Horseback riding revolutionized travel and warfare. And silk, once a closely guarded Chinese secret, began its slow journey toward the West. But perhaps the most profound advancement was the shift from bronze to iron. While much of Europe and the Near East lagged centuries behind, the Zhou learned to cast iron using heat-resistant clay molds and high-temperature furnaces. This breakthrough allowed the mass production of strong tools and weapons, dramatically accelerating agricultural output and military capability. Yet, as their influence expanded, instability followed. The Zhou Dynasty is traditionally divided into 2 major eras, the Western Zhou and the Eastern Zhou. During the Western Zhou period, the dynasty operated under a feudal-like system in which the king granted lands to regional lords who ruled on his behalf. For nearly 2 centuries, this decentralized structure functioned well. But as generations passed, local lords grew increasingly independent, accumulating wealth and power of their own. Eventually, rival factions attacked the Zhou capital of Nanjing, forcing the royal court to flee eastward and establish a new capital at Luoyang. This shift marked the beginning of the Eastern Zhou period in 771 BCE. Though politically weakened, the Zhou era became one of the most intellectually vibrant periods in world history. It produced 3 philosophical traditions that would shape Chinese civilization and much of East Asia for millennia: Confucianism, legalism, and Taoism. Confucius, born Kongqiu in the small state of Zhou, entered the world under difficult circumstances. His father, a respected military officer, died when he was only 3 years old, leaving his mother to raise him alone and in poverty. Yet, even amid hardship, she instilled in him a deep love of learning. From an early age, he immersed himself in ritual, music, poetry, and the inherited wisdom of ancient China. At 19, he married and began supporting his own young family. But tragedy soon struck. His mother died when he was still in his early 20s. Confucius observed an extended mourning period with unwavering devotion, honoring her memory according to ancient rites. To afford her a proper burial, he worked a series of modest government jobs: bookkeeping, herding livestock, and managing local records. These early experiences shaped his understanding of how ordinary people lived and how governments should serve them. As he matured, his reputation for fairness, humility, and scholarship attracted the attention of Lu's ruling families. He was eventually appointed to oversee judicial matters, an important post that allowed him to witness firsthand the disorder and moral decline that troubled Chinese states of the time. Confucius believed that society had strayed from its ethical roots. In response, he proposed restoring order through virtuous relationships and moral education. His teachings crystallized into the concept of the 5 bonds, the core relationships that sustain harmony: ruler and subject, husband and wife, father and son, elder brother and younger brother, friend and friend. At the center of his philosophy stood filial piety, the idea that strong families form the foundation of a strong state. To Confucius, China itself resembled a vast family, and rulers bore the responsibility to guide their people with benevolence and integrity. While Confucius sought harmony through virtue, another school of thought took shape that challenged his ideals: legalism. Developed most fully by Han Feizi, Legalism argued that people are inherently self-interested and must be regulated through strict laws and firm consequences. Order, not moral cultivation, was the key to a stable society. Legalism attracted many followers and would later provide the ideological foundation for the unification of China under the Qin Dynasty. The third major philosophy of the Zhou era was Taoism, which emphasized alignment with the natural order of the universe. Instead of relying on hierarchy or harsh law, Taoism taught that harmony emerges when individuals follow the Tao, the underlying flow and balance of nature. Symbolized by the famous yin-yang, this philosophy encouraged simplicity, flexibility, and restraint. Unlike Confucianism and legalism, which dictated specific moral or political behavior, Taoism embraced a more reflective outlook, summarized in the idea of wu wei, non-forced action, or acting in accordance with the natural rhythm of life. These three traditions, ethical, political, and spiritual, became the intellectual pillars of Chinese civilization. Their influence shaped imperial governance, social values, cultural practices, and personal beliefs for centuries. Because of this extraordinary flowering of thought, the Eastern Zhou era is remembered as the time of the 100 Schools of Thought, one of the greatest intellectual periods in global history. As the Zhou Dynasty weakened, its former vassal states began declaring independence. Dukes renamed themselves kings, claiming equality with the Zhou monarch. What followed was a period of unrelenting conflict and ambition. The Warring States period, an age in which 7 major states battled for supremacy: Qin, Han, Zhao, Wei, Yan, Chu, and Qi. It was during this era of total war that the strategist Sun Tzu composed The Art of War, the earliest systematic study of military strategy. His emphasis on deception, adaptability, psychological warfare, and efficient command reflected the reality of the age. Battles were becoming larger, longer, and far more sophisticated. Armies numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Campaigns could stretch for months or even years. Among these 7 states, Qin steadily emerged as the most formidable power. Its ruler, Ying Zheng, raised in a harsh frontier environment, prioritized military discipline and technological advancement. Qin forces wielded iron swords, standardized crossbows, disciplined infantry formations, and highly organized command structures, setting them apart from their rivals. The first state to fall before Qin's advance was Han, geographically vulnerable and militarily the weakest. Surrounded on all sides, it had little room to maneuver. Despite prior alliances that once shielded it, the new era left Han isolated. In 230 BCE, Ying Zheng's forces overran the state, and King An of Han surrendered within a year. Next came Zhao, a state still recovering from one of the deadliest clashes in ancient history, the Battle of Changping, 260 BCE. In this brutal showdown between Qin and Zhao, historical records estimate approximately 450,000 Zhou casualties and around 250,000 Qin casualties. The sheer scale of the losses left a deep scar on both kingdoms. Yet Zhao retained a critical asset, the brilliant General Li Mu, celebrated for his ability to defeat massive enemy forces through defensive strategy, mobility, and careful preparation. Against him, Qin made almost no progress. Ying Zheng soon realized that Zhao could not be conquered so long as Li Mu commanded its armies. Unable to defeat the general militarily, Qin turned to political subversion. Through bribery, spies, and misinformation campaigns, they sowed distrust in the Zhao court. Eventually, Zhao's ruler, misled by false accusations, dismissed and executed Li Mu. Without its greatest defender, Zhao collapsed quickly. In 228 BCE, Qin captured the capital, Handan, and Zhao's remaining claimants were eliminated over the following years. The state of Yuan, aware that its military could not match Qin, attempted an extraordinary alternative: assassinating Ying Zheng. Crown Prince Dan of Yan recruited Jingke, a renowned swordsman, to attempt the mission. The plan involved presenting Ying Zheng with a map of a coveted territory and the severed head of a Qin defector, symbols of loyalty meant to allow Jingke close proximity to the king. But the assassination attempt in 227 BCE failed. Ying Zheng escaped the attack, and palace guards intervened. The event dramatically intensified his resolve. In 226 BCE, Qin invaded Yan, captured its capital Jicheng, and defeated its armies. In desperation, King Shi of Yan executed his own son, Crown Prince Dan, hoping to placate Qin. The attempt failed. Yan was fully annexed in 222 BCE. In 225 BCE, Qin launched simultaneous campaigns against Wei and Chu, led by the veteran general Wang Jian and his son Wang Ben. Wang Ben besieged Wei's capital, Daliang, by redirecting the Yellow River. The resulting devastation reportedly caused around 100,000 casualties, many of them civilians. With its capital flooded, Wei surrendered, allowing Qin to focus entirely on Chu. Chu was one of the largest and most powerful states, and initial Qin offensives were repelled. The court summoned Wang Jian from retirement, granting him command of an enormous army. Some sources claim 600,000 troops. With this overwhelming force, Wang Jian launched a meticulously planned campaign. Chu's capital fell, its king was captured, and the state was absorbed into Qin territory. Only Qi remained undefeated, but decades of warfare had left Qi isolated, cautious, and diplomatically alone. It chose not to resist. In 221 BCE, as Qin forces advanced on its capital, King Jian of Qi surrendered without a fight. With all rival states subdued, Ying Zheng declared the end of the warring states period and proclaimed himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. Though Qin had demonstrated unmatched strength during the Warring States period, leading Ying Zheng to boast that his dynasty would last 10,000 generations, its actual rule was remarkably short. The Qin dynasty endured for only about 15 years, from 221 to 206 BCE, yet its impact on Chinese history was profound, long-lasting, and far greater than its brief lifespan suggests. It was from the name Xin that the word China, via Persian and later European languages, ultimately derived. In sharp contrast to the feudal Zhou system, whose decentralized structure had contributed to its downfall, the Qin pursued absolute centralization. Ying Zheng, now known as Qin Shi Huang, reorganized the entire realm to ensure unquestioned imperial authority. He introduced a nationwide citizen registry, ensuring that taxes flowed directly to the state rather than to local aristocrats. The old feudal territories were abolished and replaced with a network of provinces and commanderies, each governed by appointed officials loyal only to the emperor. Qin Shi Huang also embarked on sweeping standardization reforms, unifying currency, weights, measures, writing systems, and even axle widths of carts to improve road uniformity. Though these policies were intended to strengthen control over the population, they also forged the foundations of a unified Chinese identity, creating cultural cohesion on a scale previously unseen. For the first time, China truly functioned as a single, centralized empire. But Qin rule came with a heavy price. The dynasty became infamous for its severity and harsh legalism. Following the legalist philosophy, Qin Shi Huang believed that human nature inclined toward disorder, and that strict laws and firm punishments were the only way to maintain stability. Acts of dissent or disobedience were met with uncompromising penalties intended to deter future violations. Even government officials and military officers lived under systems of collective responsibility. If one member of a group failed in his duties, the entire unit could suffer consequences. The message was unmistakable. Qin Shi Huang alone commanded the empire, and every individual was accountable to his authority. Life for a peasant under the Qin, and in ancient China in general, was extremely demanding. Most peasants worked long, exhausting days in one of two main occupations, farming or silk production. To escape the strain of daily labor, people turned to simple forms of entertainment. Theater and dance were popular, and games such as kuju, an early ball game similar to hacky sack, originally used for military training, were played to pass the time. Qin society was strongly patriarchal, and life could be especially difficult for women. They were expected to stay at home, raise children, and manage the household, with little say in marriage decisions, property matters, or local affairs. Many peasants resented the emperor, viewing him as a harsh ruler whose legalist policies and severe punishments placed a heavy burden on ordinary people. Yingzheng's concerns did not end with controlling his own people. Nomadic groups, especially the Xiongnu, often regarded as the predecessors of the Huns, regularly raided the northern Qin frontier. Skilled mounted warriors, they launched fast, harsh incursions along China's borders, exposing the need for stronger defenses. This threat led to the most ambitious construction project of the Qin Dynasty, a Great Wall. It was not yet the monumental structure we recognize today, though fragments of the Qin Wall still survive. Various states had already built local defensive walls as early as the 5th century BCE, but Qin Shi Huang was the first ruler to envision connecting these segments into one continuous barrier. Peasants considered lazy, disobedient, or unproductive in farming or market work were often sent to labor on the wall. Transporting heavy materials over long distances was difficult, so builders used whatever was available locally: mountain stone in rocky regions and rammed earth across the plains. Although the Qin did not expect their wall to be the final or eternal version, their effort laid the foundation for the iconic Great Wall that would be expanded and rebuilt by later dynasties. By the age of 38, Yingzheng had conquered the warring states, survived several assassination attempts, and fortified his empire. But there remained one adversary even he could not overcome: death itself. As Qin Shi Huang reached middle age, he became increasingly obsessed with the idea of conquering death. Convinced that immortality could be found somewhere beyond China's shores, he sent alchemists and explorers across the seas in search of the legendary island of Penglai, believed in myth to hold the elixir of eternal life. The most famous of these seekers was Xu Fu, who led an expedition of 3,000 young men and women aboard 60 ships. Naturally, he returned empty-handed. To avoid punishment, Xu Fu claimed their voyage had been blocked by a giant sea creature and requested archers for protection on the next attempt. Qin Shi Huang agreed, yet Xu Fu never returned, and later traditions suggested he may have sailed on to Japan and settled there. Growing anxious and desperate, the emperor began ingesting alchemical elixirs prepared by court specialists. Around this time, he also launched the infamous book Burnings and Persecutions of Scholars, targeting writings and ideas he believed threatened his rule. Ancient records claim that hundreds of Confucian scholars were executed, and vast collections of classical texts destroyed. Ironically, Qin Shi Huang's pursuit of immortality led directly to his demise. The elixirs he consumed contained toxic mercury, and in 210 BCE, at age 49, he died while touring the eastern provinces of his empire. Before his death, the emperor had ordered the construction of a vast underground mausoleum, an entire subterranean city designed to accompany him into the afterlife. In 1974, farmers in Shanxi province accidentally uncovered the first fragments of what became known as the Terracotta Army. Thousands of life-sized clay soldiers arranged in battle formation. Each warrior is distinct. No two faces are alike, and they carry real bronze weapons crafted specifically for the tomb. Archaeologists estimate that more than 700,000 laborers worked on the mausoleum during its construction. Because of its scale and mystery, the Terracotta Army is often called the Eighth Wonder of the World. Following Qin Shi Huang's death, his prime minister Li Si feared losing influence at court. He concealed the emperor's death while returning to the capital, masking the odor with a wagon of rotting fish. Li Si forged a decree ordering the emperor's eldest son, Fusu, and a rival general to take their own lives, clearing the path for a more pliable successor. A younger son ascended the throne as Qin Shi, but he lacked his father's leadership and stability. His rule quickly descended into suspicion, corruption, and internal purges. Eventually, Qin Shi turned against Li Si as well. The former prime minister was executed, and his family was eliminated along with him. The weakened state of the empire sparked widespread rebellions. Among the leaders was Liu Bang, a former peasant and minor official under the Qin. After years of conflict, he defeated his rivals in the Battle of Gaixia, where tens of thousands were killed or captured. Qin rule collapsed, and from its ashes rose one of the greatest dynasties in Chinese history, the Han Dynasty. With his victory, Liu Bang claimed the imperial title, took the name Emperor Gaozu, and established the capital of the new Han state in Chang'an. The city was one of the few Qin areas with surviving palace structures, making it an obvious choice. This period, when Chang'an served as the capital, is known as the Western Han, lasting from 206 BCE to 9 AD. Today, more than 90% of Chinese people identify as ethnically Han, forming nearly one-fifth of the world's population. The Han Dynasty became the most populous state of its age and existed at the same time as the Roman Empire in the West. After taking power, Gaozu set in place policies that would shape China for centuries. Coming from a peasant background, he reversed many Qin practices he viewed as unfair to common people. Taxes were sharply reduced, especially in regions devastated by war, and many enslaved laborers were freed. Confucianism returned as the main philosophical tradition and was taught in the newly founded Imperial Academy, restoring moral virtue and family loyalty as the foundations of Chinese society. Gaozu also established the civil service system, preventing unqualified men from obtaining important political positions simply through connections. Government roles were now based on merit and education. This system endured in various forms until 1912 AD, nearly 2,000 years later. Despite Gaozu's success, the new empire was still vulnerable. The Xiongnu, the same nomadic confederation that had troubled the Qin, remained a major threat, and the loyalty of several Han generals was uncertain. After suffering multiple defeats, Gaozu negotiated peace and agreed to send regular tribute to maintain stability along the frontier. Gaozu died in 195 BCE, which triggered a struggle for succession. Although his second son, Emperor Hui, formally took the throne, true authority rested with his mother, Empress Dowager Lu, Gaozu's official wife. Determined to secure her position, she eliminated several potential rivals in the royal family. Her most notable target was Lady Qi, Gaozu's favored concubine, whose son the emperor had once considered as a possible successor. Ancient historians record that Empress Lu treated Lady Qi with extreme cruelty, ensuring no challenge could come from her branch of the family. Emperor Hui, distressed by his mother's actions, withdrew from ruling and lived a short, troubled life until his death in 188 BCE at age 22. Over the following decades, several rulers came and went, yet the dynasty maintained relative stability despite ongoing tensions with the Xiongnu. A turning point came in 141 BCE, when Emperor Wu ascended the throne. His reign, lasting 57 years, became one of the most influential in Chinese history. Under Emperor Wu, relations with the Xiongnu collapsed entirely, leading to full-scale war in 133 BCE. During these campaigns, Han envoys were sent westward to search for allies. Although they failed to secure military partnerships, they returned with knowledge about distant societies across Central Asia, India, and the Middle East. These discoveries paved the way for the creation of the Silk Road, a trade network linking China to the Mediterranean. The term derives from the Greek word Ceres, meaning the land of silk. For more than 1,500 years, this route supported trade and cultural exchange, including the eventual introduction of Buddhism into China. During this period of conflict, the Han Empire expanded into regions of modern-day Vietnam and Myanmar, winning major victories over the Xiongnu. But the long wars drained the treasury, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers were lost. Heavy taxes imposed to support the military burdened peasants and triggered waves of unrest, ushering in a period of instability despite the dynasty's military success. In 9 AD, a powerful statesman named Huang took advantage of the weakened Han government and proclaimed the short-lived Xin Dynasty. He seized imperial lands and redistributed them to the peasantry, earning him the later nickname of China's Socialist Emperor. However, such reforms were deeply unpopular among wealthy landowners, creating tension throughout the empire. A series of natural disasters, including floods and famine, further destabilized the Xin state. As resources drained and dissatisfaction grew, the dynasty slipped into widespread unrest. Just as the Western Han before him, Huang Mang struggled to contain the Xiongnu along China's northern frontier, and repeated military failures left the treasury depleted. Public frustration erupted into organized rebellion. Two major groups rose to prominence: the Red Eyebrows and the Lulin. The Red Eyebrows earned their name by painting their eyebrows red as a way to distinguish themselves from government loyalists. Imperial forces suffered repeated defeats, and in 23 AD Huang Mang was killed during the collapse of his regime. Although the Red Eyebrows initially appeared poised to take control, their movement quickly lost public support. Their lack of coordination, harsh treatment of local populations, and destruction of Han burial sites turned many people against them. Caught in constant internal conflict and leadership struggles, the Red Eyebrows eventually surrendered to Liu Xiu, one of several claimants to the throne and a prominent figure in the Lulin uprising. Liu Xiu, later known as Emperor Guangwu, was known for his leniency and pardoned the rebels before setting out to reunify China. Over the next decade, Liu Xiu defeated the many rival factions and self-proclaimed emperors, ultimately becoming the sole ruler and restoring the Han Dynasty. Because the city of Chang'an had been devastated during the rebellions, Emperor Guangwu established a new capital in Luoyang, marking the beginning of the Eastern Han, the second half of the long-enduring Han Dynasty. Under Guangwu's leadership, taxes were reduced and living conditions for commoners improved noticeably. More than 100 state-funded academies were founded to educate future officials, ensuring a strong and capable governing class. Guangwu continued to promote Confucianism, creating a system in which local governors nominated promising young men who embodied Confucian virtues for government positions. With such strong foundations laid during his reign, the Eastern Han entered a new golden age throughout the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. The economy flourished, education advanced, and the military became one of the most formidable forces in Asia. Technological innovations strengthened Han armies. Crossbows enabled long-distance precision, while durable iron swords and axes improved close-range combat. Resistance movements in Vietnam and Korea were subdued, and internal Xiongnu groups were defeated when they once again challenged imperial authority. During this era, however, the emperor's authority gradually weakened. The civil service class grew increasingly influential, often overshadowing the throne. A major intellectual achievement of the period was the invention of paper, which made writing and communication far more efficient and allowed ideas to spread more widely than ever before. As political power drifted from the emperor to competing court factions and advisors, governance became inconsistent. Poor decisions led to rising taxes and worsening famines, creating public unrest. Eventually, a major religious political movement emerged, the Yellow Turban Rebellion, led by the Taoist healer Zhang Jue, who declared that the Han Dynasty had lost the mandate of heaven. In 184 AD, Yellow Turban forces attacked government offices and raided villages across northern China. Although the uprising did not topple the dynasty, it revealed how fragile the state had become. To suppress the rebellion, the central government was forced to grant significant military authority back to regional aristocrats. These nobles soon transformed into independent warlords, each controlling their own territories, setting the stage for the eventual collapse of the Han Empire. After the Han Dynasty collapsed, China entered another prolonged era of fragmentation. The imperial throne weakened, countless factions rose to power, and ultimately 3 major states emerged: Wei, Wu, and Shu Han. Shu Han, the smallest in population and resources, was the first to fall. Its strength depleted after years of exhausting conflict with Wu. Despite gaining vast territory by absorbing Shu, Wei did not survive long. A powerful aristocratic clan, the Sima family, suddenly seized control, ending the state of Wei and establishing the Qin Dynasty. In 280 AD, Qin forces conquered Wu, temporarily reunifying China. The first ruler of the new dynasty, Emperor Wu of Qin, became famous not for effective governance but for an extravagant and indulgent lifestyle. Historical records describe a court overflowing with luxury, entertainment, and thousands of palace women brought from the conquered Wu state. Rather than focus on state affairs, the emperor increasingly devoted himself to pleasure and lavish feasts, leaving political matters to deteriorate. One of the most unusual stories about Emperor Wu recounts that he would travel through the palace in a goat-drawn cart. Wherever the goat stopped, he spent his time with the woman whose quarters were there. Some palace women even scattered bamboo leaves or salt outside their rooms to attract the animal. The emperor became so absorbed in these indulgences that he reportedly restricted new marriages, ensuring that no family alliances could diminish his ability to expand his own household. When Emperor Wu died in 290 AD, the Qin court collapsed into chaos. Competing royal factions launched a devastating struggle known as the War of the Eight Princes. Desperate for advantage, some princes invited nomadic groups, including the Xiongnu, to support them. This decision disastrously backfired. Once inside the borders, these groups seized the opportunity to claim northern China for themselves. Forced out of their traditional stronghold, the Jin court retreated south and re-established the capital in Jiangkang, modern Nanjing. Meanwhile, the north fragmented into numerous short-lived regimes founded by various non-Han groups. The south, though more stable, also experienced frequent changes in ruling families. For nearly 3 centuries, China remained divided, a landscape of shifting borders, rival kingdoms, and constant political upheaval. Unity finally returned with the rise of the Sui Dynasty, which consolidated power and reunified the empire in 589 AD, bringing an end to this long era of division. Although the Sui Dynasty ruled for only a few decades, it marked one of the most important turning points in Chinese history. The Sui restored power to China's ethnic Han majority and began integrating the various non-Han groups who had migrated into northern China during centuries of fragmentation. Both Confucianism and Buddhism flourished during this period, unsurprising given that Emperor Wen, the dynasty's founder, had been raised and educated by a Buddhist nun. Beyond China's borders, however, challenges grew. To the north, the rising Turks became a formidable force on the central steppe, making expansion difficult and forcing the Sui to balance diplomacy, defense, and internal development. For a brief time, the empire enjoyed stability, but it would not last. The decline began under Emperor Yang Guang, remembered in Chinese history as a ruler whose ambition far exceeded his wisdom. Obsessed with massive construction projects and costly military campaigns, Yang drained the empire's wealth and manpower. Countless laborers died rebuilding sections of the Great Wall, and millions of troops were marched into a disastrous invasion of Goguryeo in modern-day Korea. One campaign ended with staggering losses for the Sui, while Goguryeo forces suffered only minimal casualties. The empire's patience collapsed alongside its resources. Rebellions spread across China as exhausted peasants refused to continue dying for wars they did not believe in. Among the rising figures of this turbulent era were Li Yuan and his son Li Shimin, a father and son duo destined to reshape China. Li Yuan, born in 566, had deep aristocratic ties to the Sui court, though these connections offered him little protection from Emperor Yang's increasingly tyrannical rule. Li Shimin, by contrast, was a bold and gifted military strategist who had already defeated Turkic raiders multiple times. In one famous encounter, he used an array of flags and war drums to make his forces appear far more numerous, successfully frightening the enemy into retreat. At first, both men remained loyal to the Sui, but loyalty became dangerous. Emperor Yang had begun executing generals who failed to crush the rebellions, and Li Yuan knew he might be next. His hesitation stemmed partly from fear for his family's safety, especially his daughter, Princess Pingyang, but Li Shimin pushed him to see that rebellion was the only path left. Li Yuan acted shrewdly. He spread a rumor that Emperor Yang was planning yet another invasion of Goguryeo, one requiring even more troops. Furious over the previous disasters, the peasantry reached their breaking point. Recruitment became easier, and Li Yuan and Li Shimin quickly gained supporters. After arranging secret signals to ensure his family's escape from danger, Li Yuan launched his campaign toward the Chang'an. Although multiple rebel factions and Turkic forces also fought for dominance, Li Shimin's leadership repeatedly saved the movement. Against all expectations, the Li family forces continued to grow. One of the most remarkable developments came from Princess Pingyang, who had raised a force of roughly 70,000 soldiers, a rare and powerful example of a woman leading troops in early Chinese history. With her army joining those of Li Yuan and Li Shimin, the rebels captured Chang'an in a decisive assault. Li Yuan overthrew Emperor Yang Guang's grandson, while Yang Guang himself, far from the capital, was killed by his own officials, ending the Sui dynasty. Though the Sui era was brief, its fall in 618 AD paved the way for a new golden age. The foundation laid by Li Yuan and Li Shimin would soon give rise to one of the greatest dynasties in world history. The Tang Dynasty is often celebrated as one of the most brilliant eras in the long history of China. Under Tang rule, the empire enjoyed stability and prosperity on a scale rarely seen before. The population expanded dramatically, rising from about 50 million to nearly 80 million, while science, literature, and the arts flourished in a cultural renaissance unmatched in much of the world at the time. The dynasty became so iconic that even centuries later, Chinese communities abroad still refer to their districts as Tang People Streets, Tang Renji, a testament to the dynasty's lasting prestige. Yet this golden age did not arrive without struggle. After Li Yuan defeated the collapsing Sui regime, many threats still loomed. Rival states emerged to the east, and in the north, the powerful Turkic confederations steadily pressed deeper into Chinese territory. Li Yuan proclaimed himself the first emperor of the new Tang Dynasty, granting his second son, Li Shimin, the position of prime minister. His eldest son, Li Jiancheng, who had played a role in the uprising but lacked Li Shimin's military brilliance, received the title of crown prince. This arrangement stirred tension within the imperial household. Feeling overshadowed and vulnerable, Li Jiancheng formed a close alliance with another brother, Li Yuanji, and together they began secretly raising troops with the intention of seizing power by eliminating Li Shimin. Their conspiracy was discovered before it could unfold, and Li Yuan placed Jiancheng under house arrest. However, one of Jiancheng's supporters sparked an open rebellion, and Li Shimin was dispatched to suppress it. His victory was swift, but while he was away, palace politics softened the emperor's resolve. Influential concubines loyal to Jiancheng persuaded Li Yuan to treat his eldest son leniently, restoring him to favor. As external threats rose once more, the Turks advanced directly toward Chang'an. 2 years earlier, Li Shimin had negotiated a treaty with the Turkic Kaigan, but now the situation grew urgent. Li Shimin rode out to the enemy encampment and boldly challenged the Khagan to single combat if he questioned the terms of their agreement. Uncertain of Li Shimin's intentions and wary of a trap, the Khagan withdrew temporarily. Heavy rains weakened the composite bows relied upon by the Turkic cavalry, and after receiving Li Shimin's message highlighting the Tang army's strategic advantage, the Khagan reaffirmed peace and retreated without a fight. Li Shimin's reputation as the dynasty's most capable leader only grew stronger. Li Jiancheng, threatened by his brother's success, redoubled his efforts to remove him. During a banquet, he attempted to poison Li Shimin's wine. Li Shimin survived, but was gravely ill and deeply angered. Exhausted by the growing hostility among his sons, Li Yuan proposed dividing the empire in two, granting Li Shimin the east and Li Jiancheng the west. Li Shimin objected, but his father insisted. The arrangement did nothing to resolve the rivalry. Instead, it emboldened Jiancheng and Yuanji to continue plotting. In the summer of 626, amid renewed Turkish incursions, Li Jiancheng and Li Yuanji believed the moment had come to strike. They persuaded many of Li Shimin's former allies to abandon him and pressured their father to let Yuanji command the forces resisting the Turks. Li Yuan agreed, sidestepping the far more qualified Li Shimin. Jiancheng promised Yuanji the title of crown prince once he became emperor, an outcome they believed was now within reach. Their plan was simple. After killing Li Shimin, they would force Li Yuan to abdicate. But Li Shimin acted first. He accused Zhencheng and Yuanji of violating palace norms by engaging in affairs with the emperor's concubines. Summoned to court to answer these allegations, Zhencheng insisted they should go, expecting the matter could be smoothed over. Yuanji was reluctant and urged pretending illness, but Zhencheng overruled him. What unfolded became known as the Xuanwu Gate Incident, one of the most pivotal confrontations in Chinese imperial history. As Zhencheng and Yuanji approached the northern gate of the palace complex, they sensed danger. The atmosphere was tense, and before they could retreat, Li Shimin emerged on horseback and called out to them. Yuanji attempted to ready his weapon, but Li Shimin was quicker. His shot struck Zhencheng, ending his life on the spot. Yuanji fled through the palace grounds, but Yu Qijingde, one of Li Shimin's most trusted commanders, pursued him. After a brief chase, Yuanji was killed, eliminating the last major threat to Li Shimin's claim. Overwhelmed by the chaos and recognizing the impossibility of resisting, Li Yuan ceded authority to his surviving son. The male heirs of Zhencheng and Yuanji were removed to prevent future uprisings, and Li Yuan retired to a ceremonial position. Li Shimin ascended the throne as Emperor Taizong, destined to be remembered as one of China's greatest rulers. There was little time for celebration. The Turks remained a pressing threat and appeared again near Chang'an. Taizong opted for diplomacy, renewing the previous agreements rather than risking war at a moment when the empire was still fragile. Meanwhile, he carefully restructured the government. He valued talent over loyalty and even welcomed officials who had once advised his rivals, believing that honest criticism and capable minds were essential for a thriving realm. Under Taizong, China entered a remarkable golden age. Chang'an became the world's largest city, with roughly 2 million inhabitants. The empire expanded its influence westward, strengthening ties with Central Asia, India, and the Middle East. Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism blossomed side by side. Poetry, painting, ceramics, and other arts reached new heights of sophistication. Taizong's most extraordinary diplomatic triumph came in 630. The Eastern Turkic Khaganate, weakened by internal rebellion and by the Khagan's harsh treatment of his subordinate tribes, began to fracture. A prince named Ashina-Shibobi sought refuge and support from Taizong. The Tang forces intervened, defeated the Khagan, and integrated the steppe tribes under Tang protection. In gratitude, these tribes bestowed upon Taizong the unprecedented title of Heavenly Khan, acknowledging him as both a Chinese emperor and a ruler of the steppe. Even after Taizong's death in 649, the dynasty continued to prosper. Under later emperors such as Xuanzong, Tang civilization reached extraordinary cultural heights. Chang'an became a cosmopolitan metropolis, where scholars, merchants, monks, and travelers from across Eurasia mingled. However, the latter part of Xuanzong's reign marked the beginning of the dynasty's decline. In 736, the powerful official Li Linfu rose to the role of chief minister. As Emperor Xuanzong gradually withdrew from active governance, Li Linfu consolidated authority, eliminating political rivals and introducing policies that would have devastating long-term consequences. Most notably, he insisted that military governors should not be ethnic Chinese, believing this would prevent domestic factions from challenging him. One of these appointees was An Lushan, a frontier general of mixed Sogdian and Turkic heritage who commanded more than 150,000 troops in the northeast. Favored by both the emperor and Li Linfu, An Lushan rose rapidly in status, even receiving the honorary title of prince. But after Li Linfu's death, and Lushan found himself increasingly isolated by political rivals. Fearing dismissal and aware of his immense military strength, he rebelled in 755, launching what became the An-Lushan Rebellion, one of the most devastating conflicts in world history. An-Lushan captured Luoyang, declared himself emperor of a new Yuan Dynasty, and marched toward Chang'an. Though the Tang achieved key defensive victories, including the crucial defense of Yongqiu, they were soon hindered by internal discord. Strategic blunders led to heavy losses, and the road to Chang'an was left dangerously open. Realizing the capital could not be defended, Emperor Xuanzong fled toward Sichuan with his court. The journey was chaotic, morale collapsed, the emperor's authority broke down, and tensions within the entourage turned violent. Xuanzong eventually reached Sichuan and abdicated, passing the throne to his son, Emperor Suzong. Meanwhile, Chang'an was overrun by Yan forces. The city suffered massive destruction, widespread looting, and countless casualties. And Lushan's rule rapidly deteriorated. His paranoia deepened, and his harsh treatment of subordinates alienated nearly everyone around him. In early 757, he was killed by his son, An Qingshu, who then inherited the rebellion. Under Qingshu's command, the rebels besieged Suyang, where both sides endured extreme hardship. When the city finally fell after months of fighting, the Yan forces had suffered catastrophic losses, halting their momentum. Taking advantage of this weakness, loyalist Tang generals, supported by foreign allies, recaptured both capitals. The rebellion, however, dragged on until 763, leaving the empire permanently damaged. Some estimates suggest that as much as 1/5 of China's population perished during the conflict. The Tang Dynasty never fully recovered. Through the 9th century, weakened emperors, corrupt officials, and ambitious regional warlords eroded central control. Bandit groups roamed freely, looting towns and disrupting trade. In 875, Huang Chao, a former salt smuggler, ignited a massive rebellion with tens of thousands of followers. His forces swept southward, targeting merchants and elites they viewed as symbols of corruption. By 881, Huang Chao captured Chang'an and proclaimed the Qin Dynasty. His reforms focused on redistributing wealth, but he lacked the ability to sustain the capital. Famine devastated the city. General Zhu Wen, who had once served under Huang Chao, defected back to the Tang and led the counteroffensive. With the support of Turkic forces, he retook the capital. Huang Chao was killed in 884, leaving behind a legacy still debated today. Some see him as a ruthless insurgent, others as a champion of the oppressed. Regardless of perspective, the damage was irreparable. The central government had lost its authority, and the Tang military, once the strongest in Asia, was fractured beyond repair. As a brief but significant side note, the 9th century, despite being catastrophic for the Tang Dynasty, also witnessed the birth of an invention that would eventually alter the course of global history: gunpowder. Around the year 850 AD, within the borders of Tang China, an anonymous Taoist monk and alchemist set out to develop an elixir believed to heal illnesses and extend human life. In his experiments, he combined a mixture of approximately 75% saltpeter, 15% charcoal, and 10% sulfur. Instead of producing the long-sought remedy, the mixture erupted violently. The monks reportedly suffered burns, and the building in which they conducted their tests caught fire, an unintended demonstration of the substance's explosive power. Gunpowder would later be recognized as one of the 4 great inventions of China, alongside papermaking, printing, and the compass. Although it would take centuries before the formula was widely refined and weaponized, particularly under the Song Dynasty in the 10th century, the historical record is clear. The earliest known discovery of gunpowder occurred during the Tang Dynasty, regardless of later claims made by other dynasties or Western states. Although gunpowder had been discovered during the Tang era, its limited military application could not save the collapsing dynasty. China was entering an age of fragmentation known as the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms, a turbulent half-century defined by shifting alliances, ambitious warlords, rapid successions, and near-constant warfare. Like the warring states centuries earlier, the political landscape changed almost monthly, making this one of the most chaotic eras in Chinese history. The name derives from the fact that 5 major dynasties managed to rule the northern heartland in succession, while 10 independent states emerged across the south and west. Though several of these southern kingdoms were relatively stable and prosperous, they lacked the geopolitical weight of the northern dynasties, which controlled the traditional power centers of Chinese politics. The first ruler to seize the north was Zhou Wen, a man whose political career shifted dramatically with the tides of rebellion. Though he had originally joined Huang Chao's uprising, he eventually defected to support the Tang court. Once the Tang had weakened beyond recovery, Zhou Wen turned his ambitions toward the throne itself. In 904, he orchestrated the killing of the Tang emperor and placed the late ruler's young son, a boy of 13, on the throne as a puppet monarch. After consolidating power for 3 years, Zhou Wen discarded the pretense entirely. In 907, he usurped the throne and proclaimed the founding of the later Liang, the first of the 5 dynasties. Yet, his authority was far from secure. Many warlords refused to acknowledge him, including Li Keyong, one of Zhou Wen's fiercest rivals. Zhou Wen had previously made an attempt on Li Keyong's life, leaving no question that the two men could never coexist under the same regime. Li Keyong established the small but strategically important state of Jin, which would later play a critical role in reshaping northern China. Zhou Wen's problems, however, were not limited to his rivals. His personal conduct alienated even those closest to him. Zhou Wen became infamous for summoning the wives of his own sons and trusted officers to the palace for his own pleasure, exploiting his authority without restraint. Combined with vicious struggles over the imperial succession, the atmosphere in the palace became volatile. Eventually, Zhou Wen's own third son, Zhou Yugui, murdered him in a coup, but Zhou Yugui held the throne for barely a year before being killed by his younger brother, Zhou Yuzhen, who ruled from 913 onward. During Zhou Yuzhen's rule, tensions with the state of Jin intensified. Jin forces gradually grew in power, and in 923, after years of clashes in contested regions, they launched a decisive campaign. The Jin army captured key territory, overthrew the later Liang, and proclaimed a new regime, the later Tang. Its founding emperor, Li Kunshu, was the son of Li Keyong, fulfilling his father's long-held dream of replacing Zhou Wen's dynasty. The later Tang initially showed potential for reunifying the fractured realm, but internal conflicts quickly undermined their efforts. Li Kunshu and his favored consort, Empress Liu, hoarded wealth for themselves and failed to properly reward the soldiers whose victories had enabled their rise. Disillusioned troops mutinied, and in 926 the emperor was killed, plunging the state into further instability. Out of this disorder emerged Xi Jinping, a seasoned general who founded the third dynasty of the period, known as the later Jin. But Xi Jinping lacked the military power to secure his new throne, and in 936 he sought assistance from the Khitan, a powerful nomadic people who controlled a vast expanse of northeastern Asia, including parts of modern Mongolia and northern China. In exchange for Khitan support, Xi Jinping ceded to them the 16 prefectures, a strategically vital region along the Great Wall that included the territories of modern Beijing and Tianjin. The Khitan ruler, Emperor Yelu Deguang, became the later Jin's formal overlord, a humiliating arrangement that sowed resentment among Chinese officials and soldiers. When the later Jin leadership eventually tried to break free of Khitan dominance, Yelu Deguang responded with force. His armies swept south, defeated the later Jin, and plundered regions such as Shang Prefecture, present-day Anyang. After their victory, the Khitan proclaimed the Liao Dynasty, and Yelu Deguang briefly styled himself as emperor over all of China. But his rule was deeply unpopular among the Chinese population, and after facing widespread resistance, he died during an attempted return to the north. Amid this power vacuum, a commander named Liu Zhiyuan seized control and established the later Han, the fourth dynasty of the era, but like many of its predecessors, it was short-lived. Liu Zhiyuan died within a year, leaving the throne to his 17-year-old son, Liu Chengyu, whose inexperience quickly destabilized the regime. Within just 3 years, the powerful military commander, Guo Wei, overthrew the young emperor and founded the later Zhou, the fifth and final dynasty of this turbulent period. The later Zhou proved more capable than many of its predecessors, and Guo Wei's rule brought a brief restoration of order, but even this dynasty could not last. The later Zhou remained a vassal state to the Khitan in the north and struggled to assert total control over China. Finally, in 960, a new force rose to seize the moment. The Song Dynasty began when the military commander Zhou Guangyin seized control of the empire during a coup. He later united the remaining territories of China and brought an end to the chaotic 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period, restoring centralized rule. The history of the Song is traditionally divided into 2 phases: the Northern Song, 960 to 1127, and the Southern Song, 1127 to 1279. Zhou Guangyin, remembered as Emperor Taizu of Song, initiated a nationwide effort to survey and map the empire, and placed a strong emphasis on scholarship and governance. The civil service examination system was restructured, and Confucian learning was revived as the foundation of state ideology. This renewed philosophical movement would later be known as Neo-Confucianism. Although the Song reunified China, they were militarily weaker than the earlier Tang Dynasty. After Taizu's death, his successors faced constant pressure from the Khitan Liao kingdom in the north, which had emerged during the previous era of division. Over time, internal administration weakened, and a new northern power, the Yurshan people who overthrew the Liao, took advantage of Song vulnerability. In 1127, the Yurshan, now ruling as the Qin Dynasty, captured the Song capital of Kaifeng. This marked the tragic end of the Northern Song. Before its fall, Kaifeng had become a magnificent cosmopolitan center filled with palaces, temples, and pagodas under an emperor known for his love of art and culture. The city, however, fell quickly to the invading Jin forces and was heavily damaged. While the north was lost, the Jin were unable to conquer the southern territories. The Southern Song Dynasty was established in 1127, with Linan, modern-day Hangzhou, as its new capital. Despite the loss of the north, the Southern Song era became one of remarkable economic and cultural prosperity. Rice production expanded rapidly as farmers were granted more secure land rights, allowing agricultural surpluses to fuel trade. The population grew dramatically, and a wave of major technological innovations transformed society. The printing press enabled the world's first large-scale use of paper money by a government. The magnetic compass revolutionized navigation, and gunpowder weapons were once again employed in warfare. Southern Song forces launched explosive weapons from catapults and used advanced naval tactics, allowing them to defeat Jin armies at sea even when heavily outnumbered. Despite these successes, they were never able to reclaim the northern regions. Their enemies gradually copied Song technologies by capturing skilled artisans and forcing them to reproduce weapons and tools. Facing increasing military pressure, Song scholars turned inward, rejecting foreign influence and focusing on the preservation of traditional Chinese culture. This climate strengthened the return of Confucian values, emphasizing social order, family harmony, and moral responsibility. Cities became highly organized, and an extraordinary age of painting and visual art flourished, celebrating village life, nature, and domestic peace. Yet neither philosophy nor art could ultimately protect the Song from their final fate. Their dynasty would eventually fall before one of the most powerful conquerors in history, Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, born Temujin around 1162 AD on the Mongolian steppe, came from the Borjigin clan, a lineage tied to earlier tribal leaders. According to Mongol legend, he was born clasping a blood clot in his fist, an omen believed to signal the destiny of a great warrior. Life in the steppe was unforgiving. Endless tribal feuds, brutal climates, and survival through strength shaped every child from birth. From his earliest years, Temujin learned to hunt, ride, endure hunger, and navigate a world ruled by shifting alliances and constant danger. He was quiet, reserved, and intensely observant, traits that later defined his leadership. At the age of 9, his father arranged his marriage to a girl named Borte from a neighboring clan, a common political alliance among steppe tribes. But during the journey to finalize the engagement, Temujin's father Yesuge was poisoned by rival Tatars. The sudden death shattered the family's security. Abandoned by their own tribe, Temujin, his mother, and siblings were left as outcasts, forced to survive alone in the wilderness. Without their father, leadership within the family became contested. A bitter rivalry emerged between Temujin and his older half-brother Bader. One confrontation turned fatal, and Bader was killed during a dispute. This moment marked the beginning of Temujin's transformation from a struggling outcast into a hardened survivor. By his mid-teens, Temujin had gained a reputation as a skilled hunter and rider. Fearing his growing influence, rival clans captured and imprisoned him. During a nighttime feast, he escaped and fled into the open steppe, relying on both courage and cunning to survive. Not long after, at 16, he returned to Berta's camp and finally married her. Her father welcomed him with honor and gifted him a rare sable cloak. Temujin, understanding the value of alliances, presented the cloak to Togrul, a powerful tribal ruler, securing his first major political support. From that point forward, Temujin began to rebuild his power. Small clans and scattered warriors joined him, not because of noble blood but because of loyalty, discipline, and shared survival. During this period, Borte gave birth to their first child. But once again, fate struck. A group of Merkit raiders stormed Temujin's camp and abducted Borte. Refusing to accept the loss, Temujin assembled an army through his alliances and launched a retaliatory campaign. The Merkit were defeated, and Berta was rescued. She later gave birth to their son Yochi, whose paternity would later become the subject of political tension. Over the following decade, Temujin and Berta had more children, 4 sons, and several daughters. During this same period, Temujin formed a powerful alliance with his childhood friend and sworn brother Jamuka. For a time, their clans were united. They hunted, traveled, and ruled side by side. Yet, beneath the unity lay deep ideological differences. Jamuka believed in the traditional aristocratic order, while Temujin promoted loyalty and merit above noble birth. Gradually, the two drifted apart. Many of Jamuka's followers, common warriors and lower-ranking clans, began defecting to Temujin. As his following grew, Jamuka's resentment hardened into open hostility. By 1187, the two former brothers became bitter enemies. Their forces clashed in open warfare. Jamuka initially emerged victorious in one early confrontation, but his extreme brutality toward captives shocked many of his own supporters. Large numbers defected to Temujin soon after. Temujin responded not with despair, but with reform. He reshaped his army into a disciplined, highly organized fighting force. Ranks were awarded by performance, not lineage. Loyalty was rewarded, betrayal severely punished. This transformation forged one of the most efficient military systems the steppe had ever seen. In the early 1200s, Temujin allied with the Qin Dynasty to destroy their shared enemies, the Tatars. The campaign ended in total Mongol victory. But as Temujin returned to Mongolia, Jamuka once again attempted to crush him. After a series of brutal campaigns, Jamuka was betrayed by his own followers and delivered to Temujin in chains. Offered a final chance to reconcile, Jamuka refused and chose death. With his last rival gone, Temujin stood uncontested. In 1206, at a grand assembly of the Mongol tribes, Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, the universal ruler of the Mongols. By this moment, he ruled over more than 1 million people. Yet, domination of the steppe was not enough. His ambitions now turned toward China itself. At the time, northern China was ruled by the Qin Dynasty, the south by the Shang Dynasty, and between them stood the strategically vital western Xia kingdom. In 1209, Genghis Khan launched his first great Chinese campaign and crushed western Xia within 2 years. When the Jin Emperor Wanyan Yongji refused to assist western Xia, Genghis Khan turned his full fury toward the Jin. Peace envoys sent to the Jin were executed. In 1211, Mongol cavalry breached the Great Wall of China. Town after town fell. Entire regions collapsed under the speed and coordination of Mongol warfare. By 1215, the Mongols captured Zhengdu, modern-day Beijing, delivering a devastating blow to Jin power. Northern China was thrown into chaos. Yet Genghis Khan would not live to see the full conquest of China. In 1227, during his final campaign against residual western Xia resistance, he fell ill and died. Even in death, his influence was unmatched. Estimates of casualties from Mongol warfare reach into the tens of millions, though exact numbers remain debated. Modern genetic studies suggest that 1 in every 200 men alive today may carry his direct ancestral lineage. After his death, the Mongol Empire did not weaken. His third son, Ogedei Khan, continued the expansion. In the 1230s, the southern Song Dynasty allied with the Mongols to destroy their shared enemy, the Qin Dynasty, which collapsed in 1234, a decision that would later doom the Song themselves. The Mongol invasion of the southern Song unfolded in 2 major phases. The first, from 1235 to 1248, resulted in limited territorial gains and temporary stalemate. The second began after Mungke Khan, a grandson of Genghis, took power in 1251. Under his leadership, Mongol armies advanced not only deeper into China, but across vast lands stretching into the Middle East. After Mungke's death, his brother Kublai Khan emerged victorious from a power struggle and became Great Khan in 1260. Recognizing the power of rivers, coastlines, and naval supply routes, Kublai transformed the traditionally land-based Mongol army into a formidable naval power. Through a combination of classic siege warfare and innovative water-based campaigns, Mongol forces gradually broke Southern Song resistance. In 1279, after decades of relentless war, the Southern Song Dynasty finally collapsed. With its fall, the Mongols completed their conquest of China and laid the foundation for the Yuan Dynasty, marking the first time all of China would be ruled by a foreign empire. The Yuan Dynasty marked a completely new chapter in Chinese history, as it became the first imperial dynasty ruled by a non-native people. With the fall of the Southern Song in 1279, Kublai Khan stood as the undisputed ruler of China. By this time, the vast Mongol Empire had fractured into four major khanates following internal conflicts: the Yuan Dynasty in China, the Golden Horde in Eastern Europe, and the Russian steppes, the Ilkhanate in Persia, modern-day Iran, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. Kublai Khan established his capital at Khanbalik, known today as Beijing, which remains the capital of modern China. Like his predecessors, Kublai continued to pursue expansion beyond China's borders. Vietnam, which had slipped from Chinese control after the Tang Dynasty, became a major target once again. The Yuan also attempted to extend their power toward the islands of Southeast Asia, including regions of modern-day Indonesia, as well as Japan to the east. These campaigns, however, met fierce resistance. Several invasions ended in catastrophic defeats, particularly the failed naval expeditions against Japan, where powerful storms destroyed large segments of the Mongol fleet. Despite repeated efforts, the Yuan failed to permanently conquer these regions, forcing the empire to shift focus from expansion to internal control. To solidify their dominance, Kublai Khan introduced a rigid, four-tier social hierarchy based on ethnicity and conquest. At the top stood the Mongols, followed by other Central Asian groups who had supported the conquest. Beneath them were the Northern Chinese, and at the bottom were the Southern Chinese, who had been conquered most recently. Each class was granted different legal rights, with true authority concentrated almost entirely in Mongol hands. Punishments for crimes varied depending on ethnic status. Ethnic Chinese were heavily restricted from owning weapons, hunting animals such as dogs and eagles, or forming armed groups, measures designed to prevent organized rebellion. Despite this deep system of discrimination, the Yuan period also became an era of notable economic growth. Trade flourished as the Silk Road was stabilized and protected across vast territories. Cities expanded rapidly, merchants traveled freely across Asia, and long-distance commerce reshaped the Chinese economy. Buddhism gained strong imperial support, as Kublai Khan favored the religion and employed Buddhist leaders within the administration. One of Kublai Khan's greatest domestic achievements was the restoration and expansion of the Grand Canal, a massive waterway system stretching over 2,000 kilometers. The canal linked 5 critical river basins of China, including the legendary Yellow River and Yangtze River, allowing food, goods, and people to move efficiently between north and south. During this era, the Venetian merchant Marco Polo lived in Yuan China for nearly 17 years. Upon returning to Europe, he described an empire filled with technological marvels unfamiliar to the West. Among the most fascinating were the widespread use of paper money, the burning of coal as fuel, the scale of silk production, and the striking differences in social customs under Mongol rule. Yet, like all great empires before it, the Yuan dynasty did not endure. After Kublai Khan's death in 1294, the dynasty entered a prolonged period of decline. Corruption, weakening leadership, shrinking tax revenues, and repeated military failures steadily eroded Mongol authority. One of the most devastating blows came in the 1330s, when a massive plague epidemic swept through large parts of Asia. While the precise origins remain debated, modern research links the early outbreak to Mongol-controlled regions near Crimea. China became one of the first major civilizations to suffer the full impact of the disease. Between 1331 and 1334, millions perished as the epidemic spread along trade routes. By the time later waves returned in the 1350s, the population losses had grown even more severe. The same network of Silk Road trade later carried the plague westward into Europe. Amid epidemics, floods, famines, and economic collapse, resistance against Mongol rule began to ignite. A powerful peasant movement known as the Red Turban Rebellion gained momentum across northern China. Under the leadership of a former Buddhist monk named Zhu Yuanzhang, the Red Turbans transformed into a disciplined fighting force. Through years of warfare, they pushed back Mongol control, and by 1368 they successfully overthrew the Yuan Dynasty. Although the Yuan ruled China for less than a century, their historical impact was immense. China became more deeply connected to the wider world. International trade expanded dramatically, and the empire was reunified under a centralized authority. Even today, Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan remain among the most influential figures in Chinese history, despite being foreign rulers. After the fall of the Yuan Dynasty in 1368, the rebel leader Zhu Yuanzhang proclaimed himself emperor and founded the Ming Dynasty, which would rule China for nearly 3 centuries. China once again returned to native Han rule. Zhu Yuanzhang, remembered as the Hongwu emperor, rapidly consolidated his authority and built a massive standing army that is believed to have exceeded 1 million soldiers, far larger than any European military force of the era. The new emperor established Nanjing as the capital and launched a powerful revival of traditional Han Chinese culture. Neo-Confucianism was restored as the central ideology of the state, and art, literature, and scholarship flourished during this period of renewed ethnic Chinese dominance. One of China's most famous classical novels, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, was completed during the Ming era, drawing inspiration from the turbulent final years of the Han Dynasty. The Confucian civil service examinations were fully restored to ensure that officials rose through knowledge and merit rather than inherited status. Symbols of Mongol rule were deliberately erased. Many Mongol-style names, clothing, and customs were banned across the empire, reinforcing a clear cultural break from the Yuan period. Public works became a major priority under Hongwu. Having grown up as a poor peasant who had personally endured famine and natural disasters, the emperor invested heavily in irrigation systems, canals, and flood control projects. These efforts dramatically increased agricultural productivity. As a result, the economy surged. Trade routes were rebuilt and expanded, and the population grew rapidly. Hongwu also pushed China forward militarily. He ordered that at least 10% of the military be trained as gunners, leading to widespread use of gunpowder weapons, early firearms, and large-scale cannon production. These advancements allowed the Ming to successfully repel repeated Mongol raids from the north and maintain their position as one of the most powerful empires on Earth. Yet Hongwu's reign also had a darker side. Deeply paranoid about rebellion and betrayal, he introduced an extremely strict legal code. Political purges, heavy punishments, and large-scale crackdowns became tools to eliminate real or imagined enemies. Entire groups were sometimes destroyed to prevent future resistance. His fear was fueled both by internal unrest and the lingering presence of Mongol power beyond China's northern frontier. This obsession with strong borders shaped Ming policy for generations. Under later emperors, especially during the reign of the Hongzhi Emperor, massive resources were devoted to rebuilding and reinforcing the Great Wall. The most recognizable and best preserved sections of the wall that exist today date primarily to the Ming era. However, the fierce desire for absolute control did not fade with Hongwu's death. Many later Ming rulers became increasingly authoritarian, isolated, and corrupt. The final emperor, Chongzhen, ascended the throne in 1627 at just 16 years old, following the death of his reclusive and ineffective brother, the Tianqi Emperor. By the time Chongzhen came to power, the empire was already collapsing. The army was disorganized and underpaid. The economy was collapsing under corruption and misuse of state funds, and natural disasters ravaged the countryside. Rather than rebuilding the nation, much of the ruling elite focused on preserving their own power. Threats emerged on every frontier. At the same time, massive internal uprisings erupted across northern China in what became known as the late Ming Peasant Rebellions. These revolts were driven by famine, drought, heavy taxation, and widespread despair. The Ming were widely seen as having lost the mandate of heaven. Everything reached its breaking point in 1644, when the rebel leader Li Zicheng marched on Beijing with his army. As rebel forces entered the capital, the last Ming emperor took his own life, marking the end of the dynasty. Li Zicheng briefly proclaimed himself emperor, claiming that the mandate of heaven had now passed to him. The Manchus of Northeast Asia were not the only force seeking to claim the collapsing Ming throne. As the dynasty fell into chaos, the Manchu armies, who had steadily expanded their power along China's northern frontier during the late Ming period, seized their opportunity. In 1644, they entered Beijing and proclaimed the beginning of the Qing Dynasty, marking China's second foreign-ruled dynasty, preceded only by the Mongol Yuan Empire. Under the reign of the Shunji Emperor, sweeping changes reshaped daily life. One of the most visible was the enforced Manchukuo hairstyle. Chinese men were required to shave the front of their heads and grow the remaining hair into a long, braided queue. Refusal to adopt this hairstyle was treated as an act of rebellion, and over time the queue became one of the most recognizable symbols of Qing rule. To preserve Manchu authority within the state, strict ethnic policies were introduced. More than half of all high-ranking government officials were required to be Manchu, ensuring continued dominance over the empire's administration. After the Shunji emperor died of smallpox in 1661, the throne passed to his successor, the Kangxi emperor, whose reign would last an extraordinary 61 years, the longest of any ruler in Chinese history. Though deeply influenced by Neo-Confucian values, Kangxi adopted a policy of cultural and religious tolerance. He even permitted Jesuit missionaries to freely operate across China, allowing Roman Catholicism to spread among parts of the population. The Kangxi Emperor's greatest achievements, however, lay in his vast public works projects. The Grand Canal was repaired and expanded, greatly improving the transportation of grain and supplies across the empire. Massive river dredging programs were also carried out to protect farmlands from the destructive flooding of the Yangtze River. Until his death in 1722, Kangxi worked tirelessly, personally reviewing reports, directing reforms, and planning new infrastructure. Because of his dedication, long reign, and stable governance, he is widely regarded as one of the most capable and diligent emperors in Chinese history. Throughout the 18th century, commerce, culture, and the arts continued to flourish under Kangxi's successors. the Nanjing Emperor, who ruled from 1722 to 1735, and the Qianlong Emperor, who reigned from 1735 to 1796, presided over an era of remarkable population growth, economic expansion, and artistic achievement. Yet, as China moved into the 19th century, this long period of stability would begin to unravel. The 19th century became an era of aggressive global expansion for European powers. Financially strained after conflicts and colonial shifts in the Americas, Great Britain began seeking new sources of profit and resource extraction. China, already famous for its silk, tea, and porcelain, quickly became one of the most desired trading partners in the world. The Qing ruling class, however, viewed Western trade ambitions with deep suspicion. Fully aware of how unchecked foreign influence could destabilize their empire, the Qing government imposed strict limits on commerce with outsiders. They feared that economic dependence on Western powers would weaken central authority, and that Chinese society might become financially tied to foreign rulers rather than their own. They also resisted cultural and ideological intrusion. As a result, the Qing had already established the Canton system, a detailed framework designed to control and restrict foreign commercial activity. Under this system, foreign merchants were only permitted to trade through the single port of Guangzhou, Canton. During the winter months, foreign trade was suspended entirely. Western traders were required to live in tightly regulated districts known as foreign factories, and were supervised by an elite Chinese merchant guild called the Huang. Chinese citizens were forbidden from seeking employment with foreigners, borrowing capital, or exchanging commercial information with them. All foreign ships were required to anchor at Whampoa Roads, downstream from Canton, where they remained under inspection by Qing authorities. European merchants despised these restrictions. After traveling halfway across the world, they found their profits tightly controlled and their movements heavily monitored. Smuggling and piracy increased as traders sought to bypass Qing regulations. At the same time, European demand for Chinese goods continued to surge. Tea alone generated roughly 10% of British state revenue, making China an economic prize Britain was unwilling to abandon. Desperate for leverage, British traders turned to an extremely addictive commodity, opium. The British East India Company, which controlled large parts of India, cultivated vast fields of poppies and processed the drug for export. In China, opium circulated for medical, social, and recreational use, creating a profitable but destructive exchange, tea for narcotics. The Qing government fully recognized the dangers. Opium was illegal, and so was its importation. Large-scale foreign smuggling was considered a direct assault on Chinese society, yet British traders continued to flood the market through coastal smuggling networks. Addiction rates soared, silver drained out of the economy, and China's once commanding trade surplus collapsed. The Daoguang Emperor rejected repeated proposals to legalize and tax the drug, seeing it as moral and social poison. In 1839, he dispatched the scholar official Lin Zexu with full authority to end the opium trade once and for all. Lin first appealed directly to Queen Victoria, arguing that Britain carried a moral responsibility to halt the trade. His letter was never officially acknowledged. With diplomacy failing, Lin moved to direct enforcement. Hundreds of dealers were arrested. Coastal defenses were reinforced, and foreign merchants were pressured into surrendering their opium stockpiles. By spring of 1839, roughly 2.4 million pounds of opium had been confiscated and publicly destroyed along the coast. A dramatic display of Qing resolve. British merchants suffered catastrophic financial losses, and tensions exploded. A British diplomat in China, Charles Elliot, failed to contain the crisis. matters worsened after 2 British sailors killed a Chinese villager and were shielded from Chinese justice by British authorities. Outraged, Lin Zexu cut off food supplies to the British merchants, who withdrew to Hong Kong. When Chinese vessels attempted to enforce blockades, armed clashes erupted at sea, marking the formal beginning of the First Opium War. The conflict quickly revealed China's technological disadvantage. British steam-powered ships, modern cannon, and disciplined naval formations overwhelmed Qing defenses. Chinese forces suffered devastating losses in repeated engagements, while British casualties remained comparatively low. In 1840, Lin Zexu was dismissed and replaced by the official Qishan, who attempted to negotiate peace. In 1841, Qishan and Elliot drafted the Convention of Quenpi, an early agreement proposing Qing compensation and the transfer of Hong Kong. However, neither government approved the terms. The Qing court arrested Qishan for acting without authorization, while British leaders dismissed Elliot for accepting too little. The war continued. British forces pushed steadily up China's coastline and into its major rivers. By 1842, it became clear that continued resistance was impossible. That year, the Qing government signed the Treaty of Nanjing, ending the war. Its terms reshaped China's future. China would pay £20 million in indemnities. Hong Kong would be ceded permanently to Britain. The Kohong monopoly was abolished. 5 treaty ports were opened to foreign trade. British citizens in China would be tried under British law, not Chinese. This agreement became the first of the unequal treaties, a series of humiliating settlements that stripped China of sovereignty, reshaped its economy, and marked the true beginning of modern imperial pressure on the Qing Dynasty. In the wake of the First Opium War, a far more devastating threat began to rise from within China itself. The war had shattered the economy, weakened central authority, and left millions of peasants facing poverty, famine, and insecurity. Banditry spread across the countryside, and uprisings began to multiply. But none would rival the catastrophe that followed. The Taiping Rebellion would become one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. Modern estimates suggest that between 20 and 30 million people lost their lives in the civil war that tore China apart. Its origins lay not in foreign invasion, but in the mind of a single man. In 1814, a boy named Hong Shuquan was born in the Huadu district near Guangzhou. From a young age, Hong displayed exceptional intelligence and dreamed of rising through the rigid social hierarchy by passing the imperial civil service examinations, the only true path to status and power for a poor scholar. But the exams were brutally competitive. Millions of candidates competed for a handful of positions. Though Hong performed well on preliminary tests, he failed the final examinations again and again. After each failure, he returned home to teach school and save money for another attempt. After his third failure, however, the disappointment broke him. Hong suffered a severe mental collapse, accompanied by fever, delirium, and violent visions. His family feared he would die. During this period, he experienced intense dreams of heaven. A golden-bearded heavenly father dressed in imperial robes who lamented that mankind had turned to demon worship. The heavenly father gave Hong a sword and commanded him to destroy the demons corrupting the world. Alongside him stood a heavenly brother who helped lead a celestial army. Hong later claimed that in the vision he saw Confucius being punished for misleading the Chinese people. After his recovery, Hong became more reserved, disciplined, and contemplative. Years later, after yet another failure in the imperial exams, a cousin encouraged him to reread a Christian pamphlet he had received long before from a missionary. As Hong studied the text, he became convinced that his visions had been real. The Heavenly Father was God, the Heavenly Brother was Jesus Christ, and he himself was the younger brother of Jesus, sent to cleanse China of evil. From that moment on, Huang embraced a radical form of Christianity. He destroyed Buddhist and Confucian images in his home and began preaching his new faith with fiery conviction. Soon, he was banned from teaching after attacking local religious idols and traditions. In 1844, Huang and a small group of relatives, former students, and followers began traveling through southern China, spreading his doctrine. The movement grew rapidly and became known as the God-worshipping society. Tens of thousands of peasants, many ruined by famine, corruption, and taxation, were drawn to Huang's promise that the corrupt Qing rulers were demons who must be destroyed. Huang even produced his own altered biblical text and taught that true Christianity had once existed in China before being erased by Confucian corruption and imperial rule. By 1850, the movement had gathered somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 followers. Alarmed by the rapidly expanding cult-like army, the Qing authorities moved against it. In Guangxi province, imperial troops were ordered to suppress the converts. Executions began. Instead of collapsing, the God-worshipping society militarized. In January 1851, Huang's forces clashed with 7,000 Qing soldiers. Against expectations, the rebels emerged victorious after brutal fighting in which more than 1,000 men were killed. In the aftermath, Huang proclaimed the founding of a new state, the Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. From that moment on, the rebellion exploded across southern China. City after city fell as both men and women joined the cause in enormous numbers. Entire families abandoned their homes to march under Huang's banners. In March 1853, a massive Taiping army, estimated at over 500,000 soldiers, laid siege to Nanjing, defended by 40,000 to 80,000 Qing troops. After 13 days of relentless warfare, the city fell. Nanjing was renamed Tianjin, the heavenly capital. The Taiping leadership was divided among self-proclaimed heavenly kings, each claiming spiritual authority. The most powerful of these was Yang Xuqing, the so-called King of the East, who served as Huang's chief administrator. Under Yang's influence, sweeping reforms were introduced. Opium was banned, private property was undermined, and men and women were declared socially equal, though strictly segregated in daily life. European visitors who entered Taiping-controlled territory were stunned by the rigidity of the new state. Alcohol, gambling, tobacco, prostitution, dancing, and sexual relations were prohibited, and violations often carried the death penalty. Despite calling itself Christian, the Taiping state bore little resemblance to any recognized European church. Initially, Western powers hesitated over whom to support. The United States briefly considered recognizing the Taiping government. However, Britain and France ultimately sided with the Qing Dynasty. The Taiping rejection of opium, their refusal to honor treaty payments, and Huang's claim of divine kinship to Jesus made the movement both economically inconvenient and theologically unacceptable to Europe. Internal fractures soon destroyed the Taiping leadership from within. In 1856, during the infamous Tianjin incident, Yang Xuqing began openly claiming that he was the true mouthpiece of God and accused Huang of losing divine favor. Viewing this as treason, Huang ordered Yang's assassination. The king of the West and loyal generals stormed Yang's palace and killed him. What followed was a mass purge. Over the next 3 months, approximately 27,000 people, including Yang's family, followers, and suspected sympathizers, were executed. The Heavenly Kingdom descended into paranoia and terror. Meanwhile, outside forces regrouped. Qing generals reorganized their armies with Western weapons and training. As the Taiping armies continued their expansion, reports of indiscriminate killings, scorched earth campaigns, and civilian massacres multiplied. By the early 1860s, the rebellion had devastated vast regions of China. Yet, even as the Qing fought for survival against the Taiping, another catastrophe loomed on the horizon. A Second Opium War was about to erupt. Despite their decisive victory in the First Opium War, the Western powers were still deeply dissatisfied with what they had gained from China. Great Britain, soon joined by France, sought far greater commercial privileges. Most critically, Britain demanded the full legalization of opium, unrestricted access to the Chinese interior, and permanent diplomatic representation in Beijing, demands the Qing government strongly resisted. By the mid-1850s, relations between China and the West were already near collapse. All that was missing was a formal pretext for war. That pretext came in October 1856, in what became known as the Arrow Incident. Chinese officials in Canton boarded a ship called the Arrow on suspicion of piracy. The vessel had once carried British registration, but that status had already expired at the time of the search. The entire crew aboard were Chinese sailors, not British citizens. Nevertheless, British diplomats claimed that their national flag had been insulted during the incident and demanded a public apology and the release of all detainees. The Qing viceroy Ye Mingchen agreed to release several of the sailors but refused to comply fully, stating that the men were criminals under Chinese jurisdiction. Britain seized upon this refusal as justification for military action. Within weeks, British warships began bombarding Canton, whose outdated fortifications were powerless against modern artillery. As fighting spread along the river system, Chinese defensive fire mistakenly struck several American vessels, dragging the United States into the crisis diplomatically. Though the Americans did not formally join the war, tensions escalated quickly. By late 1857, British forces launched a full assault on Canton. The city fell after heavy bombardment, and Ye Mingchen was captured and exiled, where he later died in captivity. At the same time, France officially entered the war, using the execution of a French Catholic missionary, Auguste Chapdelaine, as its diplomatic justification, although his activities had violated Qing law by operating in restricted territory. With British and French forces now acting jointly, Qing resistance in southern China rapidly collapsed. In 1858, the Qing court was forced to sign the deeply humiliating Treaty of Tianjin. Its terms represented a massive surrender of Chinese sovereignty. Britain, France, the United States, and Russia gained the right to establish permanent embassies in Beijing, a city previously closed to foreign diplomats. Additional ports across China were open to Western trade. Foreign ships were granted free navigation along the Yangtze River. Foreigners were permitted free movement within China's interior. The Qing government was forced to pay enormous silver indemnities. Yet, even this was not the final humiliation. Hardliners within the Qing court urged the Xianfeng emperor to resist the most dangerous clauses, especially the presence of foreign embassies in the capital itself. The emperor refused to fully implement the treaty. The Western alliance immediately prepared for renewed war. In 1860, British and French forces targeted the strategically vital Taku forts, which guarded the approach to Beijing. After a series of brutal battles and heavy losses on both sides, the Western armies broke through and marched directly on the imperial capital. Beijing lay defenseless. Before withdrawing, the invading forces burned the Old Summer Palace, Yuan, one of the greatest cultural and artistic treasures in Chinese history. Priceless libraries, ceremonial halls, artworks, and imperial collections were reduced to ashes. The destruction of the palace remains one of the most painful symbols of China's humiliation by foreign powers. The Qing military was now entirely shattered. The Xianfeng emperor fled the capital, abandoning Beijing to the invaders. His brother, Prince Gong, was left behind to negotiate surrender. Later that same year, the Qing government was forced to sign the Convention of Beijing, which confirmed and deepened every earlier concession. Even greater indemnity payments to Britain and France, full legal protection for Christian missionaries, the permanent opening of additional treaty ports, and finally, the most catastrophic concession of all, the official legalization of opium in China. With this final clause, the Qing dynasty lost control over one of the most destructive forces tearing its society apart. The twin defeats of the First and Second Opium Wars shattered China's military confidence, stripped it of diplomatic independence, and plunged the empire into irreversible decline. These events mark the beginning of what Chinese historians would later name the Century of Humiliation. Even as China was being torn apart by the Second Opium War, the Taiping Rebellion had not yet been crushed. On the contrary, throughout the late 1850s and early 1860s, Taiping forces continued to seize city after city, exploiting the Qing dynasty's exhaustion as it struggled on multiple fronts against both Western powers and internal revolts. By this stage, the Qing court had fundamentally changed its strategy. Instead of relying solely on the traditional imperial army, the dynasty began forming regional armies under powerful provincial leaders. These new forces were loyal not to Beijing, but to their commanders, men who would later shape China's warlord era. At the same time, Western nations openly shifted their support to the Qing, alarmed by the Taiping movement's attacks on treaty ports vital to foreign trade. Britain and the United States began supplying the Qing with modern weapons, firearms, artillery, and military training. With this renewed strength, the Qing launched a massive counteroffensive. The war escalated into one of total destruction. Entire towns were burned, crop fields were deliberately ruined. Civilian populations were caught in endless cycles of siege, displacement, and starvation. As both sides devastated the countryside, famine and epidemics spread uncontrollably. Hundreds of cities were wiped from the map. Southern China descended into social collapse. By the early 1860s, the once expanding Taiping Heavenly Kingdom was steadily driven backward, losing most of its conquered territory. By 1863, only one true stronghold remained, Nanjing, the Taiping capital. The Qing armies completely surrounded the city and severed its supply lines. Starvation spread rapidly behind the walls. Food vanished. Morale collapsed. One by one, Taiping officials urged their leader, Huang to abandon the city and regroup elsewhere. But Huang refused. Still convinced that heaven had chosen him, he declared that divine aid would save the faithful, just as God had once fed the Israelites with manna in the desert. Under his influence, desperate followers consumed wild plants and weeds, believing they were heaven's gift. Instead, illness spread rapidly through the palace. In June 1864, Huang died, most likely from poisoning and starvation brought on by the collapse of his own supplies and the worsening siege. A matter of weeks later, Qing forces stormed into Nanjing. The remaining Taiping leadership was captured or killed. In the final days of the city's fall, mass executions swept through the former capital as imperial troops eliminated the last pockets of resistance. To ensure that no myth could ever rise again around the Taiping leader, Qing soldiers later exhumed Huang's body, destroyed the remains, and scattered the ashes, symbolically erasing the man who had once divided the empire. After more than a decade of warfare, the Taiping Rebellion was finally over. The death toll remains one of the highest in history. Tens of millions had perished, not only from battle, but from famine, disease, and social collapse. The Qing Dynasty had survived. Yet the empire that emerged from the ruins was deeply weakened, scarred by internal bloodshed, foreign humiliation, and irreversible military decline. Though the Qing believed they had restored order, the foundations of imperial China were already crumbling beneath their feet. The final collapse was no longer a question of if, only of when. In the decades that followed the Opium Wars and the Taiping catastrophe, corruption spread through every level of the Qing government. Central authority weakened, reforms stalled, and China continued to fall behind the rapidly changing modern world. To the east, however, a very different story was unfolding. Under the rule of Meiji Emperor, Japan underwent a breathtaking transformation. In just a single generation, the once isolated island nation rebuilt its economy, modernized its education system, adopted Western military technology, and created a powerful industrial state. While the Qing struggled to reform, Japan surged forward. Japan's ambitions soon turned toward Korea, a kingdom that for centuries had existed within China's sphere of influence as a tributary state. In 1876, Japan forced Korea to sign the Ganghwa Treaty, opening Korean ports to foreign trade, especially Japanese, and declaring Korea formally independent from Qing authority in its foreign relations. This shattered China's traditional dominance in the region. In the years that followed, both China and Japan stationed troops in Korea, each attempting to control the fragile government. A series of agreements led to the temporary withdrawal of forces, but the rivalry only deepened. Coups, assassinations, and political turmoil tore through the Korean court as Chinese and Japanese influence competed for control behind the scenes. By 1894, the situation finally exploded. A peasant uprising in Korea prompted the Qing to send troops to restore order. Japan used this as a pretext to land its own forces without Chinese consent. Diplomatic conventions collapsed. Military standoffs spread across the peninsula. On August 1, 1894, war was formally declared between the Qing Empire and the Empire of Japan. On paper, China appeared far stronger. The Qing possessed nearly 4 times as many soldiers as Japan, but in reality, the balance of power was completely reversed. Japan's army was professionally trained, centrally organized, and equipped with modern weapons. China, despite having purchased advanced equipment, remained crippled by corruption, poor training, divided command, and outdated strategy. The results were catastrophic for China. Japanese forces crushed Qing troops in rapid succession. On land, Chinese armies were outmaneuvered again and again. At sea, the once feared Beiyang fleet collapsed under Japanese naval firepower. One defeat followed another in a humiliating chain of losses. By early 1895, Japanese forces had pushed far beyond Korea, occupying Manchuria and launching assaults on the Chinese mainland itself, including Shandong. The Qing Empire could no longer continue the war. On April 17, 1895, China was forced to sign the Treaty of Shimonoseki. Its terms delivered another devastating blow to Imperial China. Taiwan and the Pescadores Islands were ceded to Japan. Korea was formally recognized as fully independent, ending centuries of Chinese influence. China was forced to pay a massive indemnity of silver to Japan. Japanese merchants gained expanded commercial privileges inside China. With this single treaty, Japan took its place among the great imperial powers of the modern world, and China was exposed as militarily and politically vulnerable before the entire globe. The defeat shocked the Chinese elite. A nation that once stood as the center of East Asia had now been crushed by a former tributary state. Another chapter was added to what history now calls the Century of Humiliation. And the Qing Dynasty, already weakened by rebellion, famine, corruption, and foreign domination, moved one irreversible step closer to its final collapse. By the early 20th century, the Qing dynasty was collapsing under the weight of decades of disaster. The empire had been shattered by the Opium Wars, devastated by the Taiping Rebellion, humiliated by the First Sino-Japanese War, and shaken once more by the Boxer Rebellion of 1900, a violent anti-foreign uprising crushed by an international coalition. Faith in imperial rule was collapsing across the entire nation. Rebellions erupted everywhere. In 1910 alone, official records counted over 280 uprisings across China. Most were chaotic peasant revolts with no unified vision for the future. But one movement stood apart: organized, ideological, and modern. That movement was the Revolutionary Alliance, founded by Sun Yat-sen, a former physician turned full-time revolutionary. By 1911, his organization had gathered around 10,000 committed supporters, many of them highly educated, military-trained, and experienced in Western political thought. Their mission was precise: to undermine the Qing from within, radicalize imperial troops, and prepare for a nationwide uprising. The revolutionaries operated in total secrecy. They disguised meetings as book clubs, social groups, and charitable associations. If authorities approached, the cells dissolved instantly. All across China, soldiers of the new army were quietly recruited into the underground network. The empire stood on the edge of collapse, and the spark came suddenly. On October 10, 1911, revolutionary soldiers within the new army stationed in Wuchang launched an armed revolt. They attacked the residence of the Qing viceroy, who fled the city. By the end of the night, the ammunition depots, arsenals, and mint were in revolutionary hands. More than 500 Manchu troops were killed, and hundreds more were captured. A military government was declared inside Wuchang. Yet the revolution had no national leader present. At that very moment, Sun Yat-sen was not even in China. He was traveling through the United States and Europe, raising funds, rallying overseas Chinese communities, and urging Western governments to withdraw financial support from the Qing. Back in China, the uprising spread like wildfire. Province after province declared independence from imperial authority. The revolutionaries secured the support of Li Yuanhong, a high-ranking Qing officer who became one of the movement's military leaders. Within weeks, multiple cities had fallen. The revolution now threatened to consume all of Hubei province. The Qing court panicked. With no capable commanders left, the dynasty turned to one final figure of authority: the powerful general Yuan Shikai, who had previously been forced into retirement. The court begged him to return and save the empire. At first, Yuan hesitated. As the revolution gained momentum, Qing supply lines collapsed, key officials were targeted, and imperial authority disintegrated. Only then did Yuan accept the appointment as prime minister on November 1, 1911. But instead of crushing the revolution, he began secret negotiations with the rebels. Shortly afterward, Sun Yat-sen returned to China. In December 1911, he was elected provisional president of the Republic of China, with the revolutionary government established in Nanjing. The Qing Dynasty was now finished. In early 1912, after more than 2,000 years of dynastic rule, the Qing imperial family formally abdicated the throne. The child emperor Puyi was stripped of sovereign power. The Empire of China ceased to exist. This was not another dynastic smena, not another rise of a new ruling house. This was something entirely different. For the first time in history, China became a republic. The ancient dynastic cycle that had ruled East Asia for millennia had finally ended. The Age of Emperors was over, and a new and deeply uncertain modern era had begun. After the fall of the Qing Dynasty in 1912, Dr. Sun Yat-sen briefly assumed the presidency of the newly formed Republic of China. But as part of earlier negotiations, he agreed to hand the position over to Yuan Shikai, on the condition that Yuan could persuade the last Qing emperor to abdicate. With the dynasty dissolved, Sun Yat-sen stepped aside, believing that the republic, not personal power, mattered most. Yet stability did not follow. By late 1915, Yuan Shikai's ambitions had grown far beyond the presidency. He proclaimed himself the new emperor of China, hoping to restore a monarchy with himself at its center. The reaction across the country was immediate and furious. After centuries of imperial rule, the Chinese people did not fight for a republic just to kneel to another self-appointed emperor. Within only a few months, Yuan was forced to abandon his imperial fantasy, and before he could fully reckon with the consequences, he died in June 1916, leaving behind a fractured republic with no unified government. What followed became known as the Warlord Era, 1916 to 1928. China splintered into dozens of autonomous military cliques, each controlled by local generals who ignored orders from the central government. Maps from this era look less like a nation and more like a mosaic of competing armies, a testament to the political disaster set in motion by Yuan's failed imperial restoration. Still, some refused to give up on the dream of a united China. Foremost among them was Sun Yat-sen, who established a rival revolutionary government in southern China. His movement was reorganized into the Kuomintang, KMT, the Nationalist Party, dedicated to reunifying the country under a republican government. At the same time, a very different political force was beginning to emerge. The May 4th movement, 1917 to 1921, sparked by intellectual frustration and rising nationalism, spread new political dreams across Chinese campuses. Marxist ideas took hold, leading to the founding of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, in 1921. For a brief period, the KMT and the CCP formed an unlikely alliance in 1922. Both sought to end fragmentation and restore national unity. But beneath this cooperation simmered a deep ideological divide, one that would erupt into open conflict only a few years later. When Sun Yat-sen died of illness in 1925, the revolutionary movement he built faced a leadership vacuum. After an intense internal struggle, command passed to Chiang Kai-shek, a rising general with firm views about the future of China. Chiang intended not only to crush the warlords, but also to contain, and eventually eliminate, the growing influence of the CCP, which he saw as a threat to the authority of the new republic. The first target, however, was the warlords. With coordinated campaigns, the KMT reclaimed city after city and brought major regions back under central control. And once the warlords were weakened, Chiang turned against his former communist allies. After uncovering a suspected CCP plot against him, he launched a brutal purge. The most infamous episode was the Shanghai Massacre, where thousands of communists, left-leaning activists, and union members were killed, as Chiang attempted to secure political dominance. The CCP was driven into crisis. Leaders such as Li Lisan and Mao Zedong argued fiercely about the movement's future. Li insisted on staying in the cities, refusing to abandon industrial centers. Mao, however, believed salvation lay in the countryside, that the peasantry, not the urban workers, were the true heart of China's revolutionary potential. His strategy eventually prevailed. From remote rural bases, the CCP slowly rebuilt, relying on guerrilla tactics and cultivating support among impoverished villages. Meanwhile, the conflict broadened beyond China's borders. The Soviet Union, pursuing its own geopolitical aims, gave varying support to Li and Mao, and looming to the east was an even more dangerous force: Imperial Japan. In 1931, Japan seized Manchuria, establishing a puppet state and signaling a new era of aggression. This expansion forced the nationalists to split their attention between crushing the communists and containing the Japanese advance. In 1932, the KMT launched the Fourth Encirclement Campaign, an attempt to annihilate the remaining CCP strongholds. Though the Red Army survived initial battles through tactical retreats, pressure mounted as Japan advanced deeper into northeastern China, stretching the nationalists thin. Mao emphasized discipline, mobility, and respect for civilians, insisting that guerrilla warfare was the only viable path for a weaker revolutionary force facing a modern army. By 1934, the KMT, bolstered by foreign advisors such as German General Hans von Zicht, launched an enormous and coordinated assault on the CCP. Using scorched earth tactics, they devastated villages and farmlands to deprive the communists of supplies. The crackdown was terrifyingly effective, forcing the CCP into one of the most dramatic retreats in world history: the Long March. Over 90,000 soldiers and 20,000 civilians began the grueling 10,000-kilometer march in October 1934. They endured 15 major battles, starvation, disease, and merciless terrain. In the end, only about 10% survived to reach the remote province of Shanxi in 1935. And yet, despite the tragedy, the Long March transformed the CCP. It elevated Mao as the unquestioned leader and cemented the party's identity as a resilient, revolutionary movement. Plans for renewed conflict with the KMT began almost immediately, but China's fate was again altered by Japan. By 1937, Japanese aggression had grown so severe that it threatened the very existence of China. Facing an enemy far more dangerous than each other, the KMT and CCP reluctantly formed the Second United Front. Even Chiang Kai-shek, who had long refused cooperation, was forced into the alliance after his own generals detained him, insisting that the Japanese threat outweighed the Civil War. The Second Sino-Japanese War erupted in July 1937 and would last until the final days of the World War II in September 1945. It became the stage for some of the darkest atrocities in modern history. Japan entered the conflict with a significant advantage. Their previous agreements with the weakened Republic of China had allowed them to station troops deep inside Chinese territory, and Beijing and Shanghai fell under Japanese control by November 1937. Their next target was the nationalist capital, Nanjing. What followed became one of the most infamous massacres ever recorded: the Rape of Nanjing. As Japanese forces advanced, Chiang Kai-shek ordered all nationalist soldiers to retreat from Nanjing rather than risk total destruction of the army. This left the city defended mostly by auxiliary units and hastily organized volunteers, men who had nowhere near the training needed to protect a capital. Aware of the approaching danger, Western missionaries, diplomats, and businessmen living in Nanjing organized the Nanjing Safety Zone, a demilitarized area meant to shelter civilians. Their courage saved nearly 250,000 people from the horrors that would follow. On December 13, 1937, the Japanese army entered Nanjing and encountered little organized resistance. What unfolded next was a nightmare. Prisoners of war were executed en masse and buried in hastily dug pits. Homes were torched, shops looted, and civilians dragged out into the streets. Families were torn apart. Japanese newspapers later described killing contests, where the soldiers raced to see who could cut down 100 unarmed captives with a sword. Boys and men were executed on sight. Women and girls suffered brutal assaults before being killed. Historians estimate that over 200,000 civilians were massacred and tens of thousands of women assaulted over the course of several weeks, making Nanjing one of the worst humanitarian crimes in world history. After the destruction of Nanjing, the wartime capital moved to Wuhan, where a massive 4-month battle unfolded in 1938. Hundreds of thousands were killed as both sides suffered catastrophic casualties. Although Japan won the Battle of Wuhan, the victory came at enormous cost, severely straining their manpower and finances. When the Japanese military later advanced into territories controlled by communist guerrilla forces, they were pushed back by hit-and-run warfare, a strategy that gradually slowed Japan's momentum in China. From this point onward, the war settled into a grinding stalemate. Major set-piece battles became less frequent, while guerrilla actions, ambushes, sabotage, and survival tactics kept Chinese resistance alive. Despite overwhelming odds, China endured long enough to witness Japan's collapse at the end of World War II, following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In September 1945, Japan formally surrendered in China. The country regained all territories taken during the war and was recognized as one of the Big Four Allied powers alongside the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom. Yet peace did not return. Almost immediately, the long-paused Chinese Civil War reignited. The KMT and CCP clashed once more, fighting for control of strategic cities and resources. American diplomats attempted to mediate, but their efforts failed. From 1945 to 1949, the Chinese Civil War entered its decisive phase. Mao Zedong's communist forces, hardened by years of guerrilla warfare and supported by millions of rural peasants, gained the momentum. Using the growing strength of the People's Liberation Army, Mao seized control of key regions and shattered the remaining nationalist resistance. By 1949, the balance of power had completely reversed from the early years of the conflict, and the victory of the CCP was absolute. The People's Republic of China was officially founded on October 1, 1949, when the Chinese Communist Party, led by 55-year-old Mao Zedong, took control of the nation after defeating the nationalists. At first, Mao was widely admired. He had unified China after decades of war and presented himself as a leader of the common people. One of Mao's earliest and most influential actions was the land reform movement, a sweeping policy that redistributed property from landlords to millions of peasants. During this campaign, over 1 million landlords were executed, as Mao aimed to dismantle every remaining element of feudalism and capitalism in rural China. Seeking rapid transformation, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward in 1958, an immense economic and social campaign designed to industrialize China overnight. Private property was abolished, farming was collectivized, and tens of thousands of rural communes emerged across the country. Backyard steel furnaces became a national initiative, with citizens ordered to melt down their personal belongings to increase steel output. But without proper training or equipment, the steel produced was often unusable. Meanwhile, the diversion of labor away from agriculture, combined with false production reports and disastrous weather, brought about the Great Chinese Famine. Between 30 and 45 million people died from starvation, overwork, and the systemic failures of the campaign. It became one of the deadliest disasters in human history and forced Mao to step down as state chairman. He was replaced by Liu Shaoqi, though Mao continued to wield enormous political influence. In 1966, determined to regain full control and eliminate ideological rivals, Mao initiated the Cultural Revolution. This movement sought to purge bourgeois influence and reinforce Maoist thought throughout Chinese society. Youth across the country were mobilized into militant groups called Red Guards, who rapidly became a vehicle of revolutionary zeal and political violence. During the early years of the Cultural Revolution, particularly the period known as Red August, mass persecutions took place. Intellectuals, teachers, traditionalists, and perceived political enemies were publicly humiliated, beaten, or killed. Schools and universities collapsed into chaos. Religious and historical sites were destroyed, and China descended into a state of ideological conflict and social upheaval. By 1968, after the Red Guards began fighting among themselves and destabilizing the entire nation, Mao deployed the military to restore order. Many former Red Guards were forcibly sent to the countryside for re-education through labor, effectively ending their role in the movement. By the time Mao died in 1976, historians estimate that between 40 and 80 million people had died under his rule from famine, political campaigns, and persecution. His legacy remains deeply complex, seen by some as the founder of modern China, and by others as the driving force behind immense human suffering. After Mao's death, leadership passed to Deng Xiaoping, who distanced China from Mao's most radical policies. Deng introduced major economic reforms that opened China to global trade and encouraged market-driven growth. Under his leadership, China's GDP expanded dramatically, setting the stage for the nation's rise as a global economic power, though political challenges and periods of unrest would continue to shape China's modern era. In the spring of 1989, a powerful call for political and economic reform swept through China's universities. Many students believed that communism was losing its grip globally, and within China, the feeling of stagnation and corruption was impossible to ignore. A breaking point came on April 15, 1989, when Hu Yaobang, former chairman and general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, died at the age of 73. Hu had been deeply admired by the public for his integrity, his willingness to challenge corruption, his push for limited political openness, and his advocacy of more liberal economic policies. Although he had been removed from power by conservative party elders, his death transformed him into a symbol of hope and political liberalization for a generation seeking change. Hu's funeral took place on April 22nd, and memorial gatherings appeared throughout major cities. Very soon, these gatherings evolved into demonstrations protesting China's lack of democratic freedoms. The largest and most influential of these protests emerged in Tiananmen Square in central Beijing. Tensions escalated further after students clashed with police, drawing even more young people into the movement. The students attempted to open dialogue with the government and drafted 7 formal demands addressed to the nation's leadership. Affirm that Hu Yaobang's views on democracy and freedom were correct. Admit that the campaigns against spiritual pollution and bourgeois liberalization had been misguided. Publish details regarding the incomes of state leaders and their family members. Allow privately operated newspapers and end government press censorship. Increase funding for education and raise the pay of intellectuals. Remove restrictions on public demonstrations in Beijing. Ensure objective, truthful media coverage of the student movement in official state outlets. When students attempted to deliver these demands to a Communist Party committee, police once again blocked them. Still, the protests only expanded. University strikes erupted nationwide, and the government adopted a harsher tone, accusing the students of attempting to create mass turmoil. This accusation outraged the demonstrators, prompting nearly 100,000 students and workers to gather in Tiananmen Square, demanding that the government retract its statement. Some students began hunger strikes, drawing widespread sympathy and support. Government representatives attempted to speak to the crowd, but the speeches were met with rejection. The students have certain requirements which must be met, otherwise they won't leave the square. Inside the government, intense debates broke out over how to handle the escalating crisis. Officials were dismissed, and frustration grew within the party. By the final 2 weeks of May, martial law was declared, and the military was ordered into Beijing. However, tens of thousands of Beijing residents flooded the streets to block the advancing troops. During this time, a group of art students created a massive papier-mâché statue called the Goddess of Democracy, which quickly became a striking symbol of resistance. Western journalists were present throughout the occupation of the square, broadcasting the unfolding events to the world. But even within the movement, chaos was growing. The square became dangerously overcrowded, and the lack of centralized leadership led to arguments and fragmentation among protest groups. Accusations spread. Some students were accused of seeking fame, others of secretly collaborating with the government. The protest movement was fracturing as the situation worsened. Then, everything collapsed. By early June, the government's patience had run out. On the night of June 3rd, the People's Liberation Army was ordered to enter Beijing and clear the square. The government issued emergency broadcasts urging civilians to stay away, but many protesters refused to leave. Some even broadcast their own messages, encouraging citizens to arm themselves and come defend the square. As troops advanced, protesters set buses ablaze in an attempt to block the military's progress. Soldiers responded with live ammunition. Many were shot, while others were beaten by groups of PLA troops. In turn, some soldiers were pulled from vehicles by enraged crowds, beaten or attacked with rocks and Molotov cocktails. Tanks pushed through the streets, crushing people who attempted to stand in their way. Because the Chinese government has censored nearly all discussion, documentation, or remembrance of the Tiananmen Square crackdown, the exact number of deaths remains unknown. Foreign journalists were blocked from reporting, footage was confiscated, and survivors remain silenced. Estimates vary widely. Anywhere from several hundred to as many as 10,000 people may have been killed in the clashes. By the morning of June 5th, the PLA had completely taken control of Tiananmen Square. Yet one moment became immortalized. A lone, unarmed protester, later known as Tank Man, stood directly before a line of approaching tanks, refusing to move. American photographer Jeff Widener captured the moment, earning a Pulitzer nomination. The image became an enduring global symbol of moral defiance against authoritarian power. After the square was cleared, all government officials and state media employees who had expressed sympathy for the protesters were dismissed, some placed under house arrest. Known participants in the movement were arrested. Several were executed and many others were sentenced to long prison terms. The international response was sharp. As a democratic nation that largely sympathized with the pro-reform movement, the United States imposed diplomatic and economic sanctions on China. Western countries broadly condemned the crackdown, and China's international reputation suffered dramatically. Economically, the sudden collapse of foreign support severely weakened China throughout the early 1990s. In the early 1990s, the communist world was undergoing enormous change. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, China suddenly became the only major communist state left. Despite its isolation and the economic blow from Western sanctions after Tiananmen, China managed to recover surprisingly quickly. As sanctions were gradually lifted, the country shifted toward a mixed system that blended socialism with market-driven capitalism. The government rolled back its insular policies, reopened the country to foreign investment, and embraced global trade. All of this followed the guiding principle of the recently retired Deng Xiaoping, whose famous motto, "To get rich is glorious," became the spirit of the decade. These reforms revitalized China's economy and positioned it for rapid growth. And as the country entered the modern era, a new figure began rising through the political ranks. A man who would soon define contemporary China, Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping was born on June 15, 1953, in Beijing, into a household deeply rooted in the revolutionary history of China. His father, Xi Zhongxun, had been a respected member of the Red Army and fought alongside Mao Zedong during the Chinese Civil War. After the establishment of the People's Republic, Xi Zhongxun served in multiple senior roles within the Communist Party. Though loyal to the government, he eventually fell out of political favor after voicing criticism of the party's handling of the Tiananmen Square protests, a stance that alienated him from influential party elders. Despite this, he remained in public roles until his retirement in 1993. Xi Jinping's mother, Qi Xin, was likewise committed to the communist cause and worked within party-run educational institutions, shaping the ideological upbringing of the future leader. Following his studies at Tsinghua University, where he earned a degree in chemical engineering, Xi Jinping entered the political world in the early 1970s. His first significant appointment came in 1972 when he became a secretary to Geng Biao, a senior military and governmental official who had previously served under Xi Jinping's father. Working closely with Geng introduced Xi to the mechanics of state administration and military governance. After 3 years, Xi was transferred to a provincial role, becoming a deputy party secretary in Hebei province. The position required him to oversee party organization, policy execution, and internal discipline, and his performance earned him a reputation as a reliable political figure. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, he continued to rise through provincial leadership posts, moving through Fujian and Zhejiang provinces, where he gained praise for economic management and anti-corruption measures. During these years, he also married Peng Liyuan, one of China's most famous folk singers at the time and a major cultural icon, further elevating his national visibility. By 1999, Xi Jinping was appointed acting governor of Fujian province, and soon after became its full governor. His responsibilities included infrastructure development, economic reform, and administrative restructuring. His reputation for stability and competence allowed him to move quickly through the party ranks, especially as China entered the new century plagued by several corruption scandals. One such scandal was the massive misuse of the National Social Security Fund, which led to the downfall of several high-ranking officials. Xi Jinping, untouched by the affair, stood out as a clean political figure, something the party leadership desperately needed. This climate of upheaval paved the way for Xi's ascent to the highest tiers of power. In October of 2007, he was appointed to the Politburo Standing Committee, the inner circle of China's leadership. His ranking on the committee placed him above Li Keqiang, another emerging star widely seen as a top contender for future leadership. This made Xi the clear successor to President Hu Jintao. The following year, he was elected Vice President of China. In this role, Xi oversaw preparations for the 2008 Beijing Olympics, managed key affairs involving Hong Kong, and continued building a national profile as a capable administrator. During this period, Xi Jinping also became entangled, indirectly, in one of the most sensational political scandals of modern China, the downfall of Bo Xilai. Bo, a high-ranking party official known for his charisma and ambition, had long been viewed as a potential rival to Xi. The rivalry abruptly ended with the Wang Lijun incident. In late 2011, British businessman Neil Heywood was found dead in his Chongqing hotel room, the victim, officially, of alcohol poisoning. Months later, Chongqing's police chief Wang Lijun fled to the U.S. consulate and exposed the truth. Heywood had been poisoned by Bo's wife, Gu Kailai, after a business dispute involving a failed real estate venture and accusations of blackmail worth $22 million. An explosive investigation followed. Gu Kailai was convicted of murder and handed a suspended death sentence, while Bo Xilai's political career was completely destroyed. The scandal eliminated the last major challenger standing between Xi Jinping and uncontested leadership of China. On March 14, 2013, Xi Jinping was formally elected President of the People's Republic of China by the National People's Congress. Once in power, he moved quickly and decisively. Xi launched an enormous anti-corruption campaign, the largest in modern Chinese history, presented publicly as an ethical crusade, but also serving to remove political opponents and centralize control under his leadership. Hundreds of thousands of officials were investigated. Many were imprisoned, dismissed, or disgraced. Parallel to political purges, Xi began tightening ideological control nationwide. Media and internet censorship increased dramatically, with stricter regulation of what information China's citizens could access. Surveillance also expanded to an unprecedented scale. China now possesses around 700 million surveillance cameras, roughly one for every 2 people, making it the most monitored society in the world. During this period, the government also introduced the social credit system, a nationwide program designed to evaluate citizens based on reliability, financial behavior, criminal record, and adherence to political expectations. A low score could result in travel restrictions, employment barriers, and reduced access to social services. Xi continued to consolidate power, and in 2018, the National People's Congress abolished presidential term limits. This historic change allowed him to retain the presidency indefinitely. In 2022, he secured a 3rd term, becoming the most powerful Chinese leader since Mao Zedong. With authority concentrated across the military, the party, and the state, Xi Jinping now stands as the defining figure of modern China, shaping the nation's political direction, global ambitions, and internal ideology for years and possibly decades to come. Under Xi Jinping's firm and deeply centralized leadership, modern China has continued its rise as one of the most formidable economic powers of the 21st century. The country is still industrializing at extraordinary speed, dominating global manufacturing, and expanding its technological and financial influence across the world. With a population of roughly 1.4 billion, only narrowly surpassed by India in 2023, China's global presence grows stronger each year. Geopolitical tensions, however, are equally on the rise. Xi Jinping's increasingly assertive stance toward Taiwan has caused great concern internationally, as has the tightening grip of Beijing's authority over Hong Kong. Beyond East Asia, China's expanding investments across Africa have sparked debate as well. While Beijing describes its initiatives as development partnerships, Critics argue that the growing political and economic leverage represents a new form of neo-colonialism. In parallel, Western nations have become increasingly wary of China's expanding military capacity. The People's Liberation Army has transformed into the world's second most powerful fighting force, surpassed only by the United States, and China now commands the largest navy on the planet. With this newfound strength, Beijing's global ambitions are more influential and more scrutinized than ever before. Culturally and linguistically, China's reach is also profound. Mandarin Chinese, spoken by nearly 1 billion people, is often described as a language of the future, emblematic of China's role in shaping the next era of globalization. And yet, the world remains uncertain. No one knows which nation will lead the generations to come, or how China's evolving power will reshape global politics, economics, and society. But one truth is undeniable. The stories of China, the world's oldest continuous civilization, its triumphs, struggles, and remarkable transformations will continue to be told for centuries ahead.